Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I don't know why I applied for a job at the funeral home, but I did. I had taken a year off between school and university. Some would say it was a year's break, but that wasn't entirely true. It was more about discovering exactly what it was I wanted to do with my life. It had been my father's archetype conceptualization for me to take a year or two off. Indeed, if my father could have begun his life all over again, he would have become an engineer and not a lawyer. When he left school, he had been expeditiously encouraged to make resolutely critical life-affirming decisions in regards to his own career by both of his parents, without procuring much-needed time for soulful contemplation or ponderous deliberation. Ostensibly to this very day, he had bitterly resented having been acrimoniously pushed around by his well-meaning, injudicious parents, and having decisions made on his own behalf based on the fact that he couldn't make up his wavering mind that was clouded by doubt and indecision at the time. His father had said, "Go into law, son. It'll stand you in excellent stead. In my opinion, it's your safest and wisest option." Not for a moment did they consider my father's personal happiness, or whether the road he would ultimately choose would offer him any long-term fulfillment or accomplished gratification. For sadly in those days, these kind of luxurious considerations were none in void, as people concerned themselves with the crucial necessities of providing for their families, and whether you derived contented satisfaction for your job or not was neither relevant or significant, as all that mattered was returning home with a pay package. All his parents could consider was whether my father would be able to provide for their grandchildren a satisfactory lifestyle one day. Never a day went by in my father's life that he didn't ruefully regret being a lawyer. I believe in me he saw his younger self caught up in the snare of ambivalent confusion. My father wanted to rescue me from the hodgepodge of a muddy sinkhole, as there is only one rehabilitation for indecision, and that is a plethora of time. Time to reflect on who you are, and to ponderously consider what life path you would like to embark upon. Time is a precious treasured gift that my father's parents never afforded him. "You're a young man," my father told me. "You have your whole life ahead of you. You don't have to rush into doing a degree. I don't want you making the grievous, regretful mistakes I made. So if you need to sit on your laurels for a couple of years before you make any definitive, unambiguous decisions, then so be it. With your excellent grades, you can pretty much choose your vocation in life, as any university would accept you gladly. But there is no need to hurry. Take your time, son. Lots of people take a gap year or two. Why shouldn't you? If you ask me, it's a great idea." I'm so glad I listened to my dad's informative, noteworthy, sagacious advice and worldly wisdom. In truth, I had no clue, nor personalized illumination, of what I actually wanted to do long-term with my life. But I did have one illustrious dream, however, and that was to go on a road trip around America on the back of a Harley Davidson. A wistful idea in the beginning that had significantly distressed my mother quite profoundly, who did not like the idea of my driving on long, lonely country roads on the back of my Harley Davidson. In truth, country roads are never a problem with a motorbike. It's the congested roads in the city you need to worry about, where reckless drivers have no consideration for the more vulnerable road users. "What are you doing buying our son a motorbike? For goodness sake! Why not a car? Forget about our son being obliviously clueless about what he actually wants to do with his life. Don't you get it? He won't have a life if he drives around in a Harley Davidson all the time. He'll be dead. Do you know how many people die in motorbike accidents every year? It's ludicrously insane." My father looked frustrated with my nannyish mother's infuriating comments that certainly seemed to rattle his cage. I could see the annoyed expression developing in his eyes. He loathed it when my mother became punctiliously overprotective towards me and my younger brother Hank. Sometimes it made him indignant, as it reminded him of the fleeting glances of a past when he had felt like a hen-pecked young man. He pipes, "When I was Malcolm's age, I wanted a motorbike just like Malcolm does, more than anything in the world, if you must know. Much like him, I was yearning to undertake an adventurous road trip on my own, exploring uncharted parts of America. My parents hastily put a spanner in the works, stopping that dream from growing any wings, coming into fruition, for my dream was their quintessential nightmare. My aspirations were crushed, obliterated, completely stamped out, like you might squash an insect under your boot. I resented my folks for that. I rarely did. Both my parents allowed their thoughts to be dictated and governed by an unavailing fear. It impetuously ruled their lives with an oppressive iron rod. It imprudently dominated every decision they ever made concerning me and my brother. It egregiously robbed our family of experiencing the rich vibrancy and fullness of life. Me and my brother both wanted to go to Africa at one time, but they were objectionably afraid that we would be bitten by a mosquito and contract malaria, despite the fact that you can take anti-malaria tablets to redeem the problem. That seemed irrelevant to them. They worried that if we didn't get a degree, we wouldn't be able to provide for our families. If we drove motorbikes, we would be killed. If I went camping, we might be obliterated from the face of the earth by a weirdo with a sawn-off shotgun, and both buried in the woods together. Everything that me and my brother ever wanted to do was quashed under their feet because of the potential risks it engaged. We tried to tell our parents that everything in life involves risks, but would they listen? No, not a chance. They genuinely thought they knew better than us. So at best our lives were dull. At the worst, the inability to engage in an activity that involved perilous risk with our friends meant that there were limitations on our lives that made us feel like birds with clipped wings. We weren't allowed to do the things other boys our age did, like climb trees or swim in ponds, which is second nature to a boy. It would make me feel so incensed. I resented them so much for infringing and imposing their will on our lives. When my dad died by slipping over a can of baked beans and hitting the kitchen countertop with his head so hard that he finally cracked his skull open, I rested my case with my mother. Despite all their protective measures over the years, against all odds, a random accident at home had killed him. It was after my father died my mother suddenly woke up, realizing I'd been right all along, as a fortuitous accident could happen anywhere, even at home. Do you know, a year after my father died, my mother jumped out of an aeroplane with a parachute. She never looked back after that. Since then, she's been taking precarious risks, and she's never felt more alive. She even apologized to me for the fearful way she treated me and my brother when we were growing up, like fragile pieces of china that could so easily break. You do make a valid point, said my mother. Our lives are never without risk. But it's news to me that your dad slipped over a baked bean can. You never told me that, nor did your mother. Well, it's not something my mother likes to discuss. It's a subject that is embarrassingly brushed under the carpet. But more to the point, sweetheart. No child of ours is going to live under a banner of fear. Never. Do you understand that? Everything in our lives engages some kind of risk. Nothing in life is without risk. Do you know how many people die in their homes every year from common household accidents? We can't wrap our son up in cotton wool, Hilda. And if he wants a motorbike, he's going to have one. I am sure Malcolm will be responsible with his vehicle, but stopping him from riding a bike based on fear is utterly ridiculous. If he wants to bike around America, I think it's a wonderful idea. Who are we to stop him? I believe it is in this adventure and exploration that he will find himself. My father always had a marvellous way of helping my mother come to her senses and see reason. So soon she was on board with the idea of my getting a Harley Davidson. As you can imagine, I was absolutely thrilled. I was now 6 months into my solo adventure around America and had decided to spend time in a pretty town outside of Portland, where I was living in a student digs for a short while. I wanted a brief break from being out on the open road, as although it was exhilarating, I desired a permanent base for just a short while. I decided I needed extra money beyond my parents' monthly allowances, and I learnt there was a job going at a funeral home. So off I went for the interview. The funeral home was like a long L-shaped double-storey home. The top story of this house, with its own separate entrance, belonged to the family that owned the funeral home. So the upstairs living quarters was devoted to family living, while the bottom floor of this funeral home, with its private entrance, was the business, where there were reception areas, consulting rooms, offices, toilet cubicles, a kitchen, showrooms for coffins and urns, an embalming room, and then a code room for the storage of dead bodies. On the outside, the funeral home presented itself as a normal, attractive home, only it was enormous in girth and size. A couple of the town churches were situated in close proximity to the funeral home, along with an extensive graveyard, where many of the locals were buried. It was a pretty graveyard, with black wrought iron gates, viridescent green fields, scattered with tall, imposing oak trees. On the day I arrived at the funeral home for my interview, I realised with bitter disappointment that there were other young men applying for the same position, and not being a local boy certainly made my chances of acquiring this position seem significantly slimmer. Well, so I thought. I parked my Harley Davidson outside the main stone entrance under the shade of a large oak tree. There were large flower pots bursting with colourful springtime displays fringing the edges of the stone pathway. The reception area was warm, convivial and inviting, with comfortable settees and couches, and a reception desk where a young female receptionist sat, who eventually led me into a conference room where I had my interview with a lady called June Pumwell, whom was the owner of this home. As I sat down on the upholstered chair opposite her, she studied me judiciously through her brown, beady eyes. "Why do you want to work at a funeral home?" she asks me. I shrug my shoulders. I decide to be perfectly honest with her. "It's simple. I need the money." "How do you feel about working with dead bodies?" she asks me, studying me curiously, to look for any awkward twitching that might suggest some uncertainty on my part. For a second, the question stings me like a hive of hornets. I was applying for a job in a funeral home. I had no comprehension I'd actually be working with dead bodies hands-on. I had been under the false impression it would be more of an administrative office job. More fool me. "Well, when you're dead, I say in a nonchalant way. I mean, I really wanted this job, so I wasn't going to let a few dead bodies rattle my cage. "I only ask because some people are squeamish about working with the dead. Do you know what the job involves?" "Not exactly. I'd appreciate it if you would tell me." Well, when you work in my funeral home, which is our family business, it's different to other kinds of businesses because it's a family business. So you'll be expected to perform all kinds of jobs. It's like we work together as a team with all hands on deck, and using your initiative is of pivotal importance. You might need to speak to a grieving person to give them moral support. Sometimes answer the telephone, talk about the different packages we have on offer, even showcase some of the coffins to prospective clients. Then on the days you're assigned to work night shift, you might be expected to receive a delivery of a corpse in the middle of the night, shortly after a patient has died. Even at night you'll be expected to answer the telephone and watch the premises, rather like a night watchman. And then if one of our drivers delivers a gurney with a corpse on it, you'll have to help them put it into cold storage. Do you think it's something you could possibly do? I don't see why not. I mean, how hard can it be? I say. Good, you've got a very positive attitude. Let me show you around the place. I follow her lead while she shows me the vast selection of coffins on display, along with a list of all the available packages for customers to choose from. Some of the coffins are so pretentiously ornate. Some can be personally designed to align with your dream coffin, like being buried in a Thomas the Tank Engine coffin, as the options are literally endless, while others are very basic, and then there are supersized coffins for the morbidly obese. We never used to have coffins this size, she tells me, but with the increase in obesity, some people cannot fit into a regular-sized coffin. I am then shown into the embalming room, and finally into the cold storage room, where the deceased bodies are fastidiously stored. June pulls some of the dead bodies on their refrigeration trays out. They all seem to have tags on their feet, but nothing that she shows me is distressing. It's what it is, a few dead bodies on trays. I can live with that. It's all benign to me. I seem to have passed the test with the flying colours, as I notice June is studying my face, looking for any signs of weakness, when she pulls out the dead corpses to see my reaction. She seems heartily relieved and pleasantly surprised. I thought you might be the squeamish type, but I can see I'm wrong about that. You'll do nicely, she says. You can start the job tomorrow working on night shift for the first couple of nights, where you will answer the phone and receive any deceased bodies requiring refrigeration during the night. Do you think you can do that? Of course. It sounds like a doddle. I mean, how hard can it be? I say. The following evening, I arrive for the night shift at the funeral home. I was asked to bring along with me a packed evening meal, as well as a book to read, to while away the long, lonely hours. I'd also like you to regularly patrol the premises, June had told me. We had a break-in once. Over a dozen coffins were actually stolen, so you need to keep your eye on everything. If you have any problems, you just press this buzzer over here, and it will connect with our security firm. They'll be on the scene in a tick. They're very efficient, and an armed security unit. I live upstairs with my family, so I prefer not to be disturbed. But in emergency situations, this bell over here rings through to the house, so then you can contact me. I thanked June and sat at the reception desk for a long while, doing nothing but twiddling my fingers. Suddenly, the piercing sound of the phone shatters the peaceful silence. I answer the call. Hello? White Dove's Funeral Home. How can I help you? A muffled woman's voice engages my attention at the other end of the line. Hello, it's Tina Marlowe speaking. I'm just checking to see if my husband, Bob Marlowe, is safely resting in cold storage. In this dreadful heat wave, I don't want him to start decomposing. I'm terribly concerned. Could you please check on him for me? Hold on a moment, ma'am, I said, tapping into the computer. You say your name is Tina Marlowe, is that right? That's right. I scanned the records for a recently delivered corpse to the funeral home, but there is no record of a Bob Marlowe's body being delivered to our home. Sorry, madam. Your husband's body has not arrived at the funeral home yet. I have no record of us being informed to pick up his body, or that we're expected a delivery of any kind. The woman becomes agitated. But are you sure? There has to be some confusion. Pretty much, madam. If it's not registered in the computer, it hasn't been checked in. Where did your husband die? I ask. The woman responds. At St. Bartholomew's nursing home. He died of a stroke at 4:30 this afternoon. I don't want to trouble you, but I'd truly appreciate it if you could please check the refrigeration units urgently. To see if my husband's corpse is there. It's dreadfully important. I have to have peace of mind. I rarely do. I can't rest if his body is decomposing somewhere. You do hear the most dreadful stories.
Ma'am, if he's not registered in the computer, he certainly shouldn't be in cold storage. It appears he hasn't been delivered to our funeral home.
The woman seems insistent. There has to be an oversight. There must be a mistake somewhere down the line. Please will you check the refrigeration units at once to see if he's there? She begs me. I know the drivers are supposed to have dropped him off ages ago. It was definitely the White Dove Funeral Home. Generations of our family have used your services. If my husband starts decomposing, I don't know what I'm going to do. The very thought, it turns my stomach green. You have to help me. I'm begging you. This is my husband we're talking about. How would you feel if it was your loved one, lying somewhere decomposing rapidly in this dreadful heat?
Please don't get upset, madam. I will take a look for you to put your mind at rest. But I do have to warn you, Mrs. Marlowe. I'm quite sure he won't be there. I don't believe his body has been collected yet.
I'll be so grateful. I can't tell you how grateful I will be. Thank you so much, the woman says. This is a family business, I think to myself. I suppose it is possible that there could be an oversight. I was new to this line of work, and in any business mistakes invariably happen. I decided to go and check the cold storage room. I mean, what harm could it do? There was an incredibly distressed woman at the end of the phone, concerned about her husband's corpse. If I could offer her a measure of reassurance, it might put an end to this inexplicable, enigmatic mystery. So I ventured towards the cold storage room with a degree of trepidation, I don't mind admitting. It was getting dark in the funeral home at this time, but it wasn't dark enough to require a torch. But when I entered the cold storage room, it was as if something felt exceedingly off. I've never been a superstitious person who believed in ghosts or ghoulies, but something was really strange about the energy in the cold storage room. It sent chills running down my spine. I had been in this cold storage facility during the day before, and beyond the sterile scent of disinfectant that infused the air with a carbolic smell, it had been rather inoffensive and mediocre, much like any other middle-of-the-road, nondescript room. Now I felt as if I wasn't alone, as if I was being watched by unseen eyes. I hastily went to the refrigeration unit, pulling out one corpse after another, checking the labels on their toes. But none of the labels had Bob Marlowe's name attached to them. I was beginning to significantly panic, as the air in the cold storage room seemed to close in on me, becoming stiflingly claustrophobic, as if I was standing in a confined space, where there wasn't much room to breathe or move. I felt exactly like that. The room felt treacherously heavy and thick, cloyingly suffocating, and the temperature plummeted so that it became incredibly cold, and a feeling of being watched became so intense that my heart pounded rapidly in my chest like a thunderous booming drum. I began to feel very nervous and unsteady on my feet. What the hell was the matter with me? I felt too intimidated to look behind me. I was certain I could feel a presence, unless my imagination was playing tricks on me, of course. How I wished the latter was indeed the case, but I wasn't sure about that. As I ran out of the cold storage unit, it feels as if silken cobwebs are brushing against my face, but there is nothing there. I return to the reception area, quickly retrieving the telephone that is incongruously dangling over the edge of the desk. How did it get like this? I hadn't left it like that. It must have fallen, I tell myself. I quickly answer the telephone. "Hello, Mrs. Marlowe, are you there? Hello? Hello?" But there is no answer. Tina Marlowe's voice isn't there. There's a static sound at the end of the phone, like when a TV goes on the blink. My forehead furrows in a series of puzzle lines. That's odd, I think, replacing the phone back on the receiver. Maybe she just hung up. Perhaps she'll call back later. I put the phone down and phone up St. Bartholomew's nursing home. "St. Bartholomew's, how can I help you?" came the female voice at the end of the line.
"Hello, I'm phoning from White Dove's funeral home concerning a deceased patient of yours, Bob Marlowe, who died at 4:30 this afternoon. I want to check if his deceased body has been collected yet. His wife informs me they're using our services, She's very concerned about getting him into cold storage as quickly as possible, given the current heat wave. She's worried about rapid decomposition.
There's a long pause at the end of the phone. Bob Marlowe, did you say? Sounded the woman's almost strangled voice. But Bob Marlowe isn't dead. As it happens, his wife is standing here in reception with me. I've been talking to her for the last 20 minutes about how to prune roses. There must be some misunderstanding. Bob Marlowe is very much alive. He suffers from Alzheimer's, but I saw him 5 minutes ago when he returned from dinner.
I'm dreadfully sorry for troubling you, I say.
That was exceedingly weird, I think, when I put down the telephone. I wasn't going to allow a strange phone call to unsettle me, but I'm not going to kid. I was relieved when my shift was over, and I decided that I would avoid that cold storage room like the plague. The next evening, when I arrive at the funeral home for the evening shift, no sooner had I sat down on the upholstered chair, and the phone begins to ring. It literally becomes a reenactment of the previous day being replayed all over again, like Groundhog Day, which was chilling to say the least. I could hardly believe it. It was the same woman from last night. She was phoning me again. Was this some kind of macabre hoax, I wondered? Was someone winding me up, having a laugh at my expense? It would seem so. Hello, is that White Dove's funeral home?
It is indeed. How can I help you?
It's Tina Marlowe speaking, says a female voice. I'm very concerned about my husband's body, with the weather being so hot of late. I need to know that he's safely in your refrigeration unit. I'm worried about rapid decomposition of his body.
You phoned last night. I checked for you. Remember, your husband wasn't there. I also phoned St. Bartholomew's yesterday on your behalf. They said your husband wasn't dead.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about at all. You're making no sense. I never phoned you last night. My husband wasn't dead then. You must have your wires crossed. You must be confusing me with someone else. My husband died at 4:30 of a stroke at St. Bartholomew's this afternoon. Now please will you check if he's been placed in the refrigeration unit yet? I decide to humour the woman, because her irritated, brusque tone was quite snappy. I tap into the computer. To my amazement, Bob Marlowe's name is on our records. His body has been checked in, and has been picked up by our drivers. The hair at the back of my neck is standing on edge. This is incredulously bizarre. How is this even plausible, I wonder? Yes, I say. Your husband's body does appear to have been checked in at about 5:30 this afternoon. Please, says the woman, please will you go and check on him? It's just, she sounds nervous, I just couldn't bear the thought of maggots crawling all over his body. You see, that happened to a friend of mine recently, when they didn't get her husband into cold storage in time. She discovered there were maggots crawling around his ears and nose. I won't rest until he's tucked away safely in the refrigeration unit. Bob would turn in his grave if he knew maggots were crawling around his body. He had a thing about worms, you know. That's why he's insistent on cremation.
I'll go and check for you, madam.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so grateful. I really appreciate it. I mean, it's the least I can do for a grieving woman. But why am I repeating an erroneous incident from the previous night that now seems to have become hauntingly real and reeks of the smell of déjà vu? How does that even happen? Could it have been a blip in the fragment of time played out from a future event that hadn't yet occurred in our reality, I wonder? I've heard of things like this happening to people before, but when it happens to you, it's dauntingly surreal. I amble towards the cold storage units, trying to abandon the former airy feelings I'd experienced the previous evening, that are clinging to me like tight, restricted, unwanted garments that I don't want to be wearing. I clandestinely enter the room. I refuse to live in fear, I tell myself. My father's absolutely right about that. I wasn't going to let an outlandish, unfathomable feeling get the better of me. I feel relief. The room appears innocuously benign. The floors look polished, gleamingly clean. Everything is sterile. The air is infused with the stench of a powerful disinfectant that almost burns my nostrils and the back of my throat. The blind in the room is flapping backwards and forwards, banging against the windows, but it's done that before, so I'm not perturbed. I walk over to the various units and pull out the trays of dead bodies, and finally I discover a tobe with Bob Marlowe's name attached to it. Thank God, I think, he's here. I close the refrigeration unit, and in a trice the room suddenly becomes inauspiciously cold. So cold, in fact, that I can see my vaporous breath before my face. I glance briefly around the room. The airy, spooky, bodeful feeling from the previous night returns. I sense I'm not alone. Something is watching me. I feel very afraid. My heart is pounding violently in my chest. I'm sweating. My breath becomes deep and rapid. And like a terrified rabbit being pursued by a fox, I hightail it back to the reception area as fast as I can, not daring to look behind me. But when I run, once again I feel as if I'm running through cobwebs that are brushing against my face. But there's nothing there. It's a creepy experience. I'm out of breath when I finally answer the phone. Hello, Mrs. Marlowe. Miss Marlowe, are you there? Yes, I am, says the woman. Is his body there? Yes, he's there, Mrs. Marlowe. Oh, what a relief! I can't thank you enough. Oh dear, she says suddenly. She gives me the impression that something else is bothering her. Is there a problem, Mrs. Marlowe? It's just occurred to me. What if my husband's glasses are still on his body? You know, he never sleeps with his glasses on. I'm worried they never removed them. I'm really sorry to put you out, but please could you go and check for me? You want me to go and check that your husband's glasses have been removed from his body? Yes, please, if it's not too much trouble, but I really don't want him lying in cold storage with his glasses on. He'd hate that. He never wanted to fall asleep with his glasses on. I'm quite sure, Mrs. Marlowe, that they removed your husband's glasses. I think it's standard procedure to do that. I need you to check. I don't mean to be so demanding, but I haven't got his glasses here with me. I've got his wedding band. They did give me that, but I think they forgot to remove his glasses. I'm sure they did. Please, will you check? All right, I'll go and check for you. The idea of returning to that hostile cold room again was giving me the heebie-jeebies, but I needed to get a grip. The poor woman was grieving. It was important to put her mind at rest, for goodness sake. That was what any decent, self-respecting, compassionate human being would do in the circumstances. I mean, how hard could it be just to check if the man is wearing his glasses, and if he is, just to remove them? It would only take a couple of minutes, surely. Even during my night watchman duties, I barely ever looked into the cold room. The place always unsettled me. As I enter the room, it still feels cold, but I quickly race towards the tray that contains Bob Marlowe's corpse. And when I pull it out, it is with great reluctance that I unveil the head area. A man's vacant dead body, minus the glasses, is staring back at me. I can see the head clearly. He looks like a mannequin. I'm surprised they didn't even bother to close his eyes after death. I quickly cover the face up and push the tray back into its slot, when once again I get this overwhelmingly uneasy feeling that I'm being watched, and I'm not alone. I see a swirling, smoky white mist in one corner of the room. I'm freaked out. I race out of the room so fast, wondering what the hell that was, but wisely choosing not to dwell on the strange anomaly. I answer the phone. Mrs. Marlowe, are you there? Oh, hello, dear. I'm sorry I put you to so much trouble. I've actually got Bob's glasses in this plastic container. They're so opaque, I didn't notice them for a moment. I'm sorry to have put you to so much trouble. No trouble at all, Mrs. Marlowe, I say, putting the phone down, feeling ever so slightly rattled. The phone rings again, but when I lift it to my ears, it's just static electricity. I look at the phone with a nonplussed expression on my face. This is my second night working at the funeral home. I'm beginning to get used to experiencing things that I cannot rationally explain. I'm still bothered about the Bob Marlowe incident. I feel unsettled as I sit down on the upholstered chair. I can hear rubber tyres on wheels outside the home, and the sound of an engine being switched off. Then there's a knock at the door. I've been expecting this call. It's the White Dove's funeral van, delivering a body on a gurney. 2 men wheel the body into cold storage and ask me what tray to use. I find them a vacant tray, and they place a tag on the man's foot, and we put it into its slot and close the door. Bloody hell, says one of the men. It's freezing cold in here. This place gives me the creeps, he says, shrugging his shoulders. I never liked this cold storage room, but I don't mind admitting this place feels rarely off-centre tonight. Something's wrong.
It certainly doesn't help having a blind that rattles like this. Let's see if I can fix it.
He moves over to the blind and opens and closes it as he tries to straighten it out.
Who's that?
He says, peering through the open blind.
Who's who? I ask. That strange man wandering around your premises. He looks harmless enough, but he looks rather lost, as if he's afflicted with Alzheimer's or something.
I peer through the windows. Sure enough, there's a man wearing burgundy pants and a creamy white shirt. He appears to be wandering around the front yard aimlessly of the funeral home. He looks to be elderly and rather unstable on his feet. As the two drivers pack up the van, I go searching for the man, but I can't see him anywhere. I watch the men driving away and leaving the premises. I sit down in the reception area, feeling rather unsettled. It's getting darker outside, so I put on the table lamp and begin to read my book that I'd brought along with me to while away the long hours. I can't seem to concentrate. Something is bothering me. That's when I hear a man's footsteps walking up and down the corridors. Click, clock, click, clock, click, clock. Hello? Is anyone there, I ask. Hello? Hello? But no one answers me. But I can hear the footsteps clearly. I cautiously follow the sound. And then they stop at the cold room, and the door opens on its own accord and closes behind itself as if someone has entered, but there was no one there. Now I feel very frightened, but I can't call anyone. I'll sound as if I've lost leave of my senses. But I do know what I saw. Something opened the door of the cold room. Suddenly the reception room becomes very cold, and then there's a knock at the door, a loud rapping sound. I haven't been notified about any deliveries to the home, so I peer through the security peephole, but no one is there. I open the door. There's a man standing in the doorway. His face looks familiar.
Oh, my word, it's Bob Marlowe. But he's dead.
For a second I just gape in astonishment, and the man vaporizes before my eyes. It happened so fast, I almost wondered if I'd imagined things. But he had been standing there just a moment ago, larger than life, as real as you or me. By this time my body is physically shaking like a leaf. The next few days I work day shift at the funeral home, and the relief I feel is immense. I meet Mrs. Marlowe, who comes to the parlour to discuss her husband's funeral arrangements. She gives me a burgundy pair of pants and a creamy top that I recognise. These were his favourite clothes, she tells me. The clothes are distinctive. Those are the clothes I saw Bob Marlowe's ghost wearing on my night shift. I can hardly believe it.
"What's wrong, dear?" said Mrs. Marlowe. "You look like you've seen a ghost."
"Nothing," I say. I'm not going to tell her that I've seen an old man wandering around the front yard of the funeral home wearing identical clothes, and that I'd actually met her husband's ghost. It was then in a moment I decided working at the funeral home was all too much for me, so I handed in my notice forthwith. I was stunned to realise that no one lasted long working in that funeral home, so I imagine I wasn't alone in experiencing some bizarre events that you couldn't explain. I wanted to get back on the open road on the back of my Harley Davidson again. I'd recently spoken to my father on the telephone. He'd asked me if I had made any decisions in regards to my life. I decided not to enlighten him about the bizarre events that had transpired at the funeral home. Fortunately, I hadn't told him I'd taken on such a job that had only lasted 2 minutes, because he wouldn't have been impressed about that.
"Have you come to any decisions about your life and the direction you want to take for your future?" he asked me. "Well, I've decided what I don't want to do," I said. "Well, that's a good start," he said. "What don't you want to do?" "I never want to get involved in the funeral business." "You do say some bizarre things, son," my father said.
It was the next day that I woke early at the crack of dawn, before the sun had even risen. I climbed on the back of my Harley Davidson, and off I went on the open road. It felt good to be out in nature again, going at such a powerful speed. There is nothing in the world more exhilarating than riding a motorbike. Of course, my mother is right about how easily your life can be snuffed out, which makes you mindfully aware of your own mortality. When I'm riding my Harley Davidson, I'm always in a permanent state of hypervigilance, which fuels the adrenaline spikes you invariably feel, and the rush of total ebullience that filters through your senses, making you feel truly alive and one with the natural world. Ostensibly in a car, you're cushioned from nature's wrath. sometimes even from the gentle rhythms of her bounteous beauty and the subtle micro-fluctuations in temperature. As I sit on my bike, I am sensitively aware of everything, to the impending threats of puddles, potholes, and even windy weather. You also learn rather quickly never to trust other drivers on the open road, for they're never thinking about you. I can feel the contours, the angles, the curves, the twist of the road beneath my legs. I can smell things when I'm travelling fast with a pronounced candour that would almost certainly bypass your senses in a car, as the air rushing past me at a tenacious speed allows me to smell the blissfully fragrant molecules of pine, fresh grass, wild flowers, and even the salty smell of the ocean. Then there are the unpleasant smells, of course, like pollution and car fumes, that I would sooner rather avoid. But I suppose you have to accept the good with the bad in everything. I have felt everything on my bike: exhilaration, terror, fear, relaxation, tranquility, and unadulterated pleasure. The first thing I realised about riding my Harley Davidson is that when you pull the throttle back, things happen very fast. In 5 seconds flat, a motorbike can reach 100 miles an hour, which gives you a fervent appreciation for the raw power between your legs. Unlike in a car, you can't just slam on the brakes. You have to navigate between accelerating, braking, traction, and lean angles. You can lean so far in turns that you almost defy gravity. And you have the assurance that a quick twist of the throttle will accelerate the bike nicely for you. There really is nothing quite like it in the entire world, if you have an eye for adventure, that is. I enjoy driving in the early morning, before the sun rises, without a solitary soul in sight. It's good to have the large country roads all to myself. It's not intimidating driving in the dark in places without any street lights. In truth, that's never bothered me in the slightest. It was still dark when I drove down the asphalt roads, surrounded by high embankments of trees that sprawled out into large wood groves. When you drive past trees in a motorbike, you can feel the temperature drop a couple of degrees. The sun had not begun to rise over the escarpment yet, but I suddenly had the urgent need to relieve myself, which obviously happens more regularly than I care to admit. I pulled my Harley Davidson to the side of the road and ambled over towards the tall imposing trees that are jiggling in the wind. In truth, I could have peed on the side of the road, as there wasn't a soul in sight, but I instinctively always pee behind a tree. So I walk behind a tree and begin to pee. I think I hear a clanging sound, but I pull out my fly and return to my motorbike, but it's nowhere to be seen. How does that happen? I have my keys in my pocket, but my motorbike has vanished. It seems that since I've worked in the funeral home, strange, unfathomable things seem to be happening to me all too frequently. What the hell is going on? How can a heavy bike like that disappear into thin air? Where has it gone? I begin to feel panicky, as I'm in a remote place off the beaten track, without my bike or a cell phone, as my cell phone is in my bike. That is when I hear this excited chattering sound. It sounds like two people engaged in an animated conversation together, in a foreign language. I move towards the strange voices, and that's when I see in the middle of the woods my Harley Davidson, surrounded by two animated Bigfoots, rubbing their hands down the sparkling metal, admiring the contours of my bike. I think they're attracted to the gleaming metal, rather like a magpie is attracted to glittering things. I watch in complete awe as the creatures talk backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, discussing my bike in detail. They don't see me, as I'm hiding behind the trees, wondering what my next move should be. Do I approach such intimidating, imposing creatures like this? They seem benevolent, but how can I be sure about that? They're so gargantuan in size, a male and female with human-looking faces, overlong arms, and burly bodies covered with long flowing dark hair. I watch in gog-eyed amazement as they continue talking together about my bike. There's lots of nodding, and a plethora of effusive gestures with long arms. The language is very, very defined. These creatures are incredibly expressive, and even without understanding their language, I know they think my Harley Davidson is absolutely ace. There's no accounting for good taste, methinks. The large Bigfoot picks up my huge motorbike in his hands, as if it's a toy car, and returns it to where I'd left it last. I wait for a while, and then I return to my bike. I climb onto it, my heart thundering, and I can sense I'm being watched. And as I drive away, I glance briefly over my shoulders to see the two Bigfoots standing in the road,
watching me drive off on my bike, and then they stand there talking together again, as if they're absolutely gobsmacked. To cut a long story short, after spending 2 gap years deciding what I want to do with my life, I came to the decision I wanted to become involved with motorbikes. I ended up never going to university, as my passion for motorbikes is all-consuming, and I make a great living selling Harley Davidsons to the more discerning customer. One thing I've learnt about the world is that not all things can be explained, and strange things can happen. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I'm an outdoorsy, adventurous type of person, so when it came to determining what I would ultimately do for my bachelor's party, 12 of my best lifelong friends, whom had been an expediently invaluable part of my life growing up, decided to come on a camping weekend with me, where we were going to hike during the day and barbecue at night, drinking ice-cold beers under the canopy of a velvety blackened firmament, with the twinkling silvery stars and the shimmering white moon smiling down upon us like old friends. We would nostalgically reminisce over the good old days, watching the crackling flames of the fire hiss and spit, while we wistfully reflected over some of those old memories, back to the days when we had been Boy Scouts together. We had left Denver for the Colorado countryside. I had found a desirable camping ground that included many exciting hiking trails that had come highly recommended to me by an acquaintance of my father's. I was the first to arrive at the camping ground, as I was hosting this event, in my white SUV, along with my best friend Julian, who had accompanied me on the trip. We had brought along with us 3 4-man tents that I had hired, along with a plethora of fresh food and a bountiful supply of ice-cold beers and Sauvignon Blancs. The campground had a separate toilet and bathroom area, along with a large deep freeze and refrigerator unit that you could hire to store and refrigerate your fresh perishable produce, which is what we did. We had never heard about this camping ground before, but had learnt it was privately owned by a wealthy, affluent family. So we were remarkably impressed to see that there was a large, luxurious bathroom on site, containing hot showers and toilet cubicles that were not only pristine, but perfectly kitted out with white fluffy towels and tiling robes, along with cute little bottles of shampoo and soap for guests to use. There was also a grandiose kitchen that visitors to the campground were able to use at will, containing all the culinary essentials like glasses, bowls, food blenders, and so much more. It was early spring, and we had been informed by the owners that we were the first campers to christen the year with our presence, as the campground had been shut down during the winter months. Me and my best friend Julian, whom I'd asked to be my best man at the wedding, had been as thick as thieves all our lives. We had lived on the same street in Hilltop, Colorado, which has an urban, suburban feel about it, and is situated close to cafes, bars, and restaurants. Julian was quiet and unassuming, and as my best man, he confessed to me in the car on our journey to the campground that he was simply petrified about doing a best man speech on my behalf for my wedding the following Saturday. "Niles," he says to me, biting his lip awkwardly, "I'm not sure that I've got the guts to stand up in front of 200 people on your wedding day. I'm sorry, bro. I don't think I can do it. I'm terrified of public speaking. I'm sorry, bro. I really don't want to let you down, but I don't have a choice in the matter." "Of course you can do it, Julian. Don't sell yourself short," I tell him. "We grew up doing everything together. No one knows me better than you do. It would be a travesty, in my opinion, if someone else did my best man speech. I want you to do it, Julian. You would be brilliant. No one knows how to crack a joke like you do." I can see Julian is physically grimacing. "Remember that time I fainted on stage when I was playing the part of Joseph in the Christmas school play when I was 8 years old? That was a long time ago. You weren't feeling well, remember? It was rather funny, actually. Luckily they got Barry to replace you, didn't they? Everyone thought the fainting was part of the act. It was fabulous. The audience was cracking up with laughter,
You made everyone laugh. I didn't faint because I was sick, bro, he whispers. I was panicking so much about being on stage in front of all those parents. It was all consuming for me. I fainted from sheer terror. I never told anyone about it, but it's true. Nothing has changed, bro. I'm still the little 8-year-old boy inside myself. I'm equally as daunted about doing your speech. Even the thought of it is giving me the heebie-jeebies. I may be 26 years old, bro, but nothing has changed in that department for me. I'm literally petrified of standing up in front of all your family and friends. He pauses for a brief moment, taking in a deep breath. Do you know what the worst part of it all is? I'll be expected to inject humour in my speech, when merely standing up in front of these people is likely to make me wet myself in terror. Why didn't you say something before, bro? I say. I've always known you were reticent, self-effacing, very reserved, but I never contemplated for a moment that you were actually petrified of delivering a speech. How about if you read it word for word from a piece of paper? Would that make you feel more comfortable? It's significant to me, Julian, that you do the speech for us. It would mean the world to Carmen and me. I can't tell you how important it is. Julian looks exceedingly frustrated. He's champing at the bit, biting the inside of his cheek. He looks indignant. That's not going to help, bro. I know you mean well, and I don't want to let you down, but I can't do it. I would feel like a complete imbecile standing in front of the crowd, trying to read off a piece of paper. It may be 1,000 times worse than doing the speech au naturel. I can feel a desolate disappointment rising up in my belly, punching my insides. Julian's soulful, earnest protestations feel like a kick to the teeth. They really do. Julian is the only person that could pertinently be befitting to do my best man's speech. I sagaciously ruminate about it for a moment, and then an arresting idea grabs my attention. I do believe I have a solution to this problem. Do you think you could do my speech on videotape? We can play it to the audience on a white screen at my wedding. Then you won't be intimidated by all the people, because the video has already been pre-recorded and processed. Won't it look odd if I'm on your wedding video, doing a speech, when I'm at your wedding all along? Look, bro, it doesn't matter if you do my speech on a video recorder. I'm not bothered about that at all. At least you'll be doing my speech, not some random moron who doesn't know me from Adam, spouting a bunch of baloney about my younger life. It doesn't matter what people think. I don't care about that. You do a speech to a video camera with me filming behind the lens, videotaping you. Surely that can't be too overwhelming for you. That should be fine. I could do that, I suppose. Good, I say. Then that's settled. Before long, my SUV is driving down a rocky, precipitous earthen road, with a sign that points to Sagebrush Campground. The journey to the elaborate wrought-iron gate is tumultuous, to say the least. The road is not accommodating, and the path is treacherous, as there's some unwelcome potholes in the middle of the road. My heavy-duty rubber tyres siphon off a whole lot of red dust that whirls up in the air in vaporous clouds. My car begins to jolt and wobble precariously. I hadn't expected to encounter such wrath on the road, but then this is a campground well off the beaten track, so perhaps such uncongenial, hostile roads are just part of the rugged landscape. Indeed, I'm in no doubt we are surrounded by an arresting, beguiling beauty that has transfixed our assiduous focus over the last 20 minutes. We have spotted a plethora of wildlife, clearly not used to a human presence, as several deer have already crossed our path. I've seen some wild horses galloping in a field. They look so contented in this sumptuous haven, free to roam at will wherever they please, with the gentle breeze blowing their long black manes in the wind, just watching them freely frolicking in the field.
unbridled by human restraints, makes me smile a gleeful grin. Finally we reach the wrought iron black gate, with a clear sign, Sagebrush Campground, attached to the gate in an illustrious golden scroll. Much to our surprise, a bedraggled-looking character, who has hair that hasn't seen a brush in decades, and his clothes look as if they've been slept in all week, darts up quickly to open the gate for us. I'm not quite sure what to make of the scruffy vagabond, who looks unlikely to be employed by the well-to-do, affluent owners of this campground, but he's certainly behaving as if he owns the place, judging by his confident swagger and his air of confidence, so I give him the benefit of the doubt. My mother's words spring to mind. Niles, never judge people by their appearance. You never know their true life story. Hello, I say, winding down the window of my SUV, and attempting to smile at this less than savoury character. The air seems pronouncedly injected with an alcoholic stench that rather reeks of rum.
Hello, sir, he says. Welcome to Sagebrush Campground,
he says, giving us a toothless grin. He looks very creepy. Something about this unlikely character does set my nerves on edge, but we soon forget about him and ignore him as we drive down the long road, fringed by viridescent green grass, pretty flowery meadows, hilly outcrops, and a plethora of bristlecone pine trees, cottonwood, juniper, and spruce trees that rise up into the sky like masterful, graceful giants, scattered liberally over the entire campground, sometimes in dense clusters of natural woodland, other times more sparsely spread out. But it's all so beautiful. I can't fault this place, not even for a moment. We drive through an enchanting area, heavily shaded by glorious-looking trees, and in a large clearing we find a grandiose ablution block, like none I've ever seen before, as well as the kitchen. Once I've parked my SUV under the shade of a very generous tree, both Julian and I quickly unpack all our meat and fresh produce very efficiently, placing them in the refrigeration units. Then we begin to set up the 3-4-man tents for the 12 of us to sleep in overnight. They're generously spacious, sumptuously cosy. Things are certainly looking very rosy. Everything is fastidiously prepared when the other SUVs arrive on the scene, and all 12 of us are reunited again for this special gathering, and it's so good to be together again, like the good old days.
This is amazing, Niles, says my friend Jasper. Oh my God, it was a journey to get here, and that bumpy dirt road is an obstacle course. But by golly, it's worth it. This place is absolutely splendiferous, and those views, oh my God, they're drop-dead gorgeous. I can't believe how grandiose the bathrooms are, James, another friend of mine, tells me. Talk about a touch of luxury in the middle of nowhere. This place really rocks. This is going to be amazing, bro, says Simon. I mean, 12 of us in the natural world. It doesn't get better than this. It rather reminds me of when we went camping as Boy Scouts together. To start the ball rolling on this celebratory event, we all decided to go for a hike in the woods, 12 of us together in a chatty, cheerful, convivial group, thoroughly enjoying the benefits of sharing in the delights of this intrepid adventure together. The congenial Sylvan seemed to whisper to us. The trees almost hugged us generously as they jiggled their boughs, almost as if they were welcoming us into this beguiling sanctuary. It was a breathtakingly beautiful day in early spring, which meant that the landscape was crowned with colourful regalia. Some trees were in blossom, others richly green, some welcoming a brand new flush of bountiful leaves to adorn their curvaceous boughs. The weather was so pleasant, very agreeable. It was not too hot or too cold, as winter was only briefly behind us. Even the sunlight that permeated so gracefully through the open canopy was a soft, generous, ethereal light, reminiscent of spring, as the glaring, intense, intrusive light of a sweltering hot summer's day is never eagerly engaged in this time of the year. It was good to feel the cool air blowing embracingly against our faces, as our eager feet bounded up the undulating, steep, precipitous earthen trails
that was so fertile that the ground was almost black, while beneath our feet it was liberally sprinkled with a confetti of leaves and twigs. If that wasn't heavenly enough to behold for our hungry, appreciative eyes, the forest floor was enchantingly dappled with pretty flowers in pinks, blues, mauves and yellows that had burst through the forest floor, splashing the landscape with a kaleidoscope of pretty flamboyant colours, while interesting sculptural-looking funguses, some even edible, clung to the bottom of tree trunks in golden clusters, and bright verdant mosses weaved their sumptuous emerald threads over the forest floor in graceful resplendent carpets. And then to add more delicacy to this twinkling oasis, there were pretty ferns growing bounteously under the trees, spreading out their feathery arms like umbrellas. There were rabbits bounding through the woods, squirrels racing up trees, while the bird song filtered through the valley with a series of pretty tweets, whistles and warbles. After our walk we returned back to camp and prepared a large crackling fire. In a trice the forest was filled with the smoky, aromatic and spicy aromas of a sizzling barbecue that meant stomachs invariably started to grumble and growl. Hunger was quick to engage our immediate interests, as she refused to be ignored. I prepared several large, generous salads on site, and brought out a huge bucket of beers on ice, Sauvignon Blanc and cans of Mountain Dew. And so it was until late in the afternoon we were feasting on delectable melt-in-the-mouth succulent spare ribs, chicken wings and burgers, while drinking back beers and reminiscing over the good old days, while getting ever so slightly inebriated in the process. It would seem that the day drew to a close very swiftly, as the sky lightly began to dim, marbling in a grey colour, and as the disk-like sun set over the valley, it glazed the landscape in billowing ribbons of pinks, yellows, tangerines and golds. Then, as if by magic, the sky curtained itself in a velvety blackness, and a crescent moon and a scattering of bright silvery stars made their presence known, as they lit up the Milky Way. As the night steadily progressed, smoothly along its natural course, like a lengthy song being played, we were serenaded by the chorus of frogs croaking, crickets chirping, along with the distant sounds of what must have been coyotes howling. I do not know how long we talked for, nor how long we ate for, but it seemed like a very long time, until we could keep our weary eyes open not a moment longer. So most of us staggered back to our sleeping bags clumsily, rather like drunken vagrants, losing our way in the process. We were so bladdered that we almost crashed the moment our heads hit the floor, and passed out, highly intoxicated from drinking way too much. But none of us minded being drunk, and off our heads like this. That was the whole idea of a bachelor's party, was it not? I must have been the first to awaken, but early morning it most certainly was not. I was shocked to find it was already lunchtime, as all of us had overslept in our tents, due to how bladdered we had become the previous night, with much of our garrulous ramblings and excessively inappropriate laughter, all but obscure hazy memories, left behind like the lukewarm ashy embers of a dying fire. We all slowly but surely began to sluggishly reawaken from our enervated, flagging slumber, our appetites now elevated and amplified considerably after a night of drinking to excess. I quickly built a fire and began to start cooking sausages, bacon and burgers. The delicious smell wafted over the campground. Everyone was gathering around the fire. The weather was pretty chilly, as the sun had failed to offer us companionship this morning, and sulkingly had scurried away to hide behind the horizon. So some people were sitting around the fire, hogging as much warmth as they could get. That was when I noticed that Julian was missing. I grew ever so slightly disquieted and apprehensive. Where the heck was he? It was certainly abnormal for him not to be up and about. I thought he'd always be the first to be up with the birds. So where the heck was he? "Has anyone seen Julian?" I ask, but shoulders are shrugged, as everyone confesses they have not seen sight or sound of him, although Simon seemed to remember he'd said he was going to take a late-night stroll before bed that night. "I'm sure he must have come back," says Roy, another one of my friends. "Perhaps he was the first to get up this morning and go for a walk.
If my memory serves me right, Julian didn't get drunk like the rest of us did last night. He's never been a big drinker. Maybe he's having a warm shower even as I speak." I decided to check the grandiose ablution block, but there was absolutely no sign of Julian. I went through his belongings in our tent to see if I could see his head torch. If that was missing, then it would imply he hadn't returned from his nightly stroll, if indeed he had actually taken a walk at night, as Simon had inferred. I knew it was a kind of impulsive, spontaneous, off-the-cuff decision that Julian would be inclined to make. Most people might feel threatened to go for a walk in the woods at night, but not the voracious Julian. My best friend has an insatiable, unquenchable, avaricious appetite for adventure. He was all too quick to blow caution to the wind in any situation. He might be afraid of talking in front of an audience, but when it came to embarking on the challenges of the natural world, Julian was audaciously open to almost anything, and fear was not something he engaged. He was like an intemperate, untamed wild horse that you literally had to restrain at times because of his ebullience. He had recently returned from hiking to the Himalayas and seemed to have more bounteous energy than even the guides.
My heart begins to flutter, as if there are thousands of bats flapping around my chest. My chest tightens so much, as if something is squeezing and suctioning the life out of me. I feel as if I can't breathe. When I realise that Julian's head torch is missing. Where the heck is he, I wonder? I feel an ominous, vacuous hollow developing deep down in my guts, a sinking feeling that makes me feel as if I'm drowning in a deep, murky pool. I instinctively sense that something is terribly wrong. It's like an inward prognostication that consumes me.
"What's the matter?" says Jasper, stuffing a piece of sausage into his mouth. "You look troubled and aggrieved. You shouldn't be looking like that as the groom." "There's something very wrong. Julian's head torch is missing," I say. "I'm very concerned and troubled. This means he did indeed go for a walk last night in the wood grove. Simon wasn't wrong about that. If he had left early this morning, he wouldn't have taken a head torch with him, would he? Which means if he left last night, he's been gone for hours, and he hasn't returned." "Not necessarily," says Jasper. "It's still dark early in the morning. He could have left very early." "Regardless," I say, "whether he left very early this morning or late last night, you would think he would be here by now, at lunchtime." Everyone begins to search the area, looking frantically for Julian. I can't shake off the inauspicious, bodeful sense of foreboding that something quite calamitous might have happened to him. Jasper and I quickly go and search for Julian in the wood grove. We see a distinctive trail of mountain lion footprints firmly punctured in the soft earthen floor, like perfect stencil marks, so that there is no doubt in our minds that as recently as last night a mountain lion had been loitering around the place. And if that isn't questionable enough, we see a long trail of blood weaving across the earthen floor. My heart begins to thunder through my chest so fast that I can hear and feel the ponderous vibrations. I can taste the nauseous bile rising up in the back of my throat. I feel as if I want to vomit. I cannot escape the baleful trepidation that has extravagantly seized every single cell in my entire body with a pervasive foreboding. I can see that whatever has been bleeding across this woodland trail has almost certainly lost a substantial amount of blood. There is no way on God's earth that a person or animal could survive so much blood loss. The blood is dripping off ferns like a scarlet rich dew, across the velvety green moss, and has turned some white flowers pink. They dance so innocently in the breeze, oblivious to what this blood loss actually conveys. The air smells coppery, as even the taste of blood is now physically detected on my own tongue. My heartbeat continues to pound, almost as if I'm running a marathon. My breathing increases. I don't want to think what I already know. Jasper and I look at each other with horror. Neither of us say a word. We are too terrified to articulate our gruesome thoughts. We both perceive what the other is thinking. The unthinkable words that are so unspeakable desire to grace our tongues, for they are restrained by a reluctance of note.
Then we stumble inadvertently across what looks like a funky toadstool, standing up in the ground. It demands my immediate scrutiny. I examine it more closely. I realise that this is no mushroom. It's a greyish-green looking big toe with a flat nail bed. It's human. Jasper and I stare at each other in unalloyed discomposure. I pick up the detached toe in my hands to study it more intensely. This is the most gruesome thing that I have ever beheld. It's like something you might observe in a ghastly, depraved horror movie, when the director wants to extract a maximum amount of shocked outrage or umbrage factor from his viewing audience, to make them scream out in disgusted revulsion. For a moment it feels just like that. It's so surreal that I feel that this is what it is, a crazy part in a play. Jasper looks at me with wide eyes. "Is it his?" he asks. The words that come out of his mouth are a gruffy whisper. "I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what Julian's toes look like. I mean, I don't ever look at his toes." "I suppose it's not something you rarely notice in people," agrees Jasper. "But I'm sure it must be Julian's. I mean, who else's toe can it be?" "Oh my God," I say. "It means Julian's dead. There won't be any best man speech at my wedding." I don't know why I say that. I couldn't give a damn if there's no best man speech. But that is all I can think to say at this poignant moment. In reality, I had lost my best friend, whom had been a brother to me growing up. My eyes cloud over with a moist humidity. What am I going to do? I've lost my best friend. "Look, I will be your best man at your wedding. I will do your speech for you," says Jasper. "Do you think I bloody care about my best man's speech any more?" I chide. "My best friend could be dead, and all you can do is prattle on about my wedding speech. He's my best friend, for goodness sake. Don't you get it? I can't imagine him not being in my life." I say this, choking back tears that are gathering now in my eyes like rain clouds ready to burst, but I fight them back. I don't want to make a spectacle of myself. "We don't know for sure that this is Julian's big toe," says Jasper, trying to console me. We continue to search the area. I find a scattering of a few more toes lying on the earthen floor. I now have 5 toes in my hand. "Look over there," says Jasper suddenly. We move towards this hedgerow. I see a mangled foot sticking out of the bush, minus its toes. I let out an ear-piercing, discomposed scream. "Oh my God! He's dead! He's dead!" I can see a rib cage, stripped of all its flesh, lying ominously through the brush, like the remnants of a lion's meal. It's too dreadful to absorb. Such a horrific, discomposing sight. It causes every muscle within me to tremble and clench tightly. My stomach lurches in horror. I run quickly over to a bush and begin to hurl violently. My best friend is dead. The horrifying reality grips me with such a delayed sense of shock that for a moment I become almost completely numb. We return to the campground speechless. We are ready to tell everybody the horrific news. As we approach the group of men sitting by the crackling fire, chatting away garrulously, making another attempt on the beers. The air is infused with the delicious smell of sausages, but I feel like I want to be violently ill all over again. Everyone becomes stationary as we walk towards our circle of friends. Smiling faces lose their ebullience, chatting mouths are visibly silenced, as stoic eyes are now fixed on us intently, almost as if they can sense by our sombre, doleful expressions that something quite dreadful has happened. For a moment both me and Jasper are too frozen by shock to be able to utter a single word. Finally Jasper manages to say, Julian, he's dead. He was eaten by a mountain lion. His body is there in the wood grove." When Simon sees Julian's toes in my hands, he immediately races over to a tree and hurls up his breakfast. For a moment everyone is lost for words, too shocked to say a single thing. It's rather like a game of musical chairs when the music suddenly stops and everybody freezes. The whole group of men around the fire becomes frozen in time like a still photograph,
or like the wax statues at Madame Tussaud's. All of a sudden, trailing through the woodgrove is Julian. He's wearing a bright sunny smile on his face. Simon punches me in the shoulders, almost knocking me to the ground. "You're sick, Niles! What kind of a joke do you think this is? You scared us shitless! That was not funny, bro. Not funny at all. And as for those toes, where the hell did you buy them? What joke shop sells something like that? This is a gruesome, sick joke. It's not funny. I don't give a damn that this is your bachelor's party. I'm sorry, but this is not a nice stunt to pull." No one else is saying a word, as all eyes are fixed on Julian, as if no one can quite believe it really is him. "What the hell is wrong with you guys?" asks Julian. "You're all staring at me so dumbfounded, as if I'm a ghost." "We thought you were dead," I gasped, grabbing Julian, hugging him so tightly that I almost deprive him of oxygen. "We thought you were dead. We thought a mountain lion killed you." "Oh, you know about the mountain lion," says Julian. "You're right, it could have killed me last night. I was saved in the nick of time, thank God. Boy, I have quite the story to tell you. I'm not quite sure if you're going to believe me, but it's true." Jasper is looking at me with a nonplussed expression on his face. "If Julian isn't dead, then who is that recently deceased body in the woodgrove?" Jasper and I need no encouragement. Within a trice we race back to the woodgrove as fast as we can, and using a stick we manage to haul out the skeletal remains from under the bush. Thankfully the head is still intact. I recognise it at once. It belongs to the unkempt gatekeeper that had opened the gate for us yesterday morning, when we had arrived at Sagebrush Campground. Julian, who has now joined us, is gasping as he stares at the remain. "That could have been me last night." When we return back to camp, he proceeds to tell us his story. We all listen to him with wide-eyed, childlike eyes, hanging on to his every word with a wondrous awe and total bewilderment. Could his story be true? But we can see that it most certainly is. We have no reason to doubt his incredulous account. Julian's story. As you know, I'm not a big drinker. I can manage to down a couple of beers in an evening, and then I've had quite enough. The rest of you got so bladdered and plastered last night. You were talking a bunch of baloney and finding everything hilariously funny. It's amazing how when you're drunk, you can talk about the most nonsensical things and find them interesting and gripping, whereas I was getting so bored last night by your idle, ridiculous, drunken prattle and chit-chat. Simon is sitting there chuckling away. "Well, my girlfriend, her nose, it looks like Donald Duck. She doesn't like it when I tell her that she looks like Donald Duck." "Well, does she have feathers?" says Roy. "Then you might think she is a duck." Ha ha! Everybody laughs and says cheers to that. Roy says, my girlfriend, she's got very big old ladies' knickers. She wears old ladies' knickers. They're so big. I thought it was a shower cap. I wear them in the shower. And my girlfriend, she's not happy about it. They're big holes in the shower cap. She says, I knew I was wearing her knickers, like I would really wear her knickers into the shower. She thinks I did it on purpose. She thinks that I would wear her knickers in the shower on purpose. She says I'm calling her fat because her knickers are big. Because her knickers are big. If I said that to my wife, says Jasper, she'd hit me. She'd hit me with a wooden spoon. If she's cross, she uses a wooden spoon on me. Your wife is not nice, Jasper. Your wife is not nice. No, she's not nice. I remember thinking to myself that you were all talking such crap. I wanted to escape this drunken bacchanalia, and a walk seemed like the best idea. So I take a walk in the woods with my headlamp. I think I briefly mentioned to you, Simon, that I'm going for a walk, but your eyes appear to be glazed over, You appear to be finding everything hilariously funny, but you do nod at me briefly and say, "You're going to the woods. Oh, he's going to the woods. You're going to the woods." I walk away from you guys. I can hear your mumbles and laughter. I feel a measure of relief escaping the raucous merriment as I enter the woods. I'm surprised how delicious the smells of barbecue smoke are, along with the aromatic spices that have infused the air. I'm sure the smell is likely to make many a wild animal that enjoys eating meat, like a cougar or a coyote, rather hungry. But I don't dwell on those fleeting thoughts. The cool breeze is blowing against my face. It's both refreshing and exhilarating. I feel marvellously uplifted. The tall, towering trees with their graceful, elegant boughs swagger against this current, like drunken sailors, but they almost are welcoming me, as the soft moonlight dances through the canopy. It casts its ethereal, silvery shadows over all the scenery. It gives the forest a mysterious, outer-worldly ambience, which really is rather intriguing. I'm enjoying listening to the sounds of crickets and frogs, and then in the distance the howls of a coyote. I begin to walk further up the precipitous trail, stopping dead in my tracks, as suddenly everything grows very quiet. The congenial forest has taken on a menacing ambience, and I sense I'm not alone. Something is watching me in the dark shadows. And then through the foliage I catch sight of this monotonous, bright pair of yellow eyes. And then I hear a roar. And then I see it. It's a mountain lion, with its jaws wide open, exposing its jagged, sharp canine teeth. It's about to charge me, pounce on me, and I have no means of defence. I pick up a stone and throw it at this cat, but it remains undaunted, unafraid, unintimidated. I scream, but the cat looms forward. I can see my life flashing before my eyes. This creature's intentions are very clear. I'm dead. If I run, it'll catch me. If I fight back, my attempts to save myself will be futile. The cat pounces on me, pushing me on the ground. I am flung to the floor. Then suddenly the creature is pushed away from me. A huge arm lifts me off the earthen floor, flinging me over his shoulders. The next thing I know is I'm being carried away. And then I feel as if I'm caught up in a dream. This can't be happening. 1 minute my life is nearly expunged from me by a mountain lion. The next thing I'm riding on the back of this powerful beast covered in hair. But what is it? I can't imagine. Is my life still in danger? I can hear the rise and fall of the creature's breath, smell moss and grass on his long, lustrous black hair. Have I evaded one lion's den, only to enter another, I wonder? What is this creature? What does it want from me? After a while, this humongous creature puts me down on the ground and points to a bed made up of mosses, as if to say, "Go and have a sleep over there." I realise the creature's a Bigfoot. Before this point in time, I'd never conceived that such creatures could possibly be real. But this benevolent Bigfoot is as real as you and me. I realise she's female. She has large, pillowy breasts that hang low upon her chest, the only part of her that is actually sagging. The rest of her gargantuan body is taut with impressive muscle definition, and when her dark black silky hair blows backwards in the wind, I can see a tight six-pack in her stomach area on the underlying grey skin there. I perceive the Bigfoot is at least 8 foot tall and about 700 pounds. She is burly, lofty, powerful, majestic. She has a pointed head that seamlessly folds into her shoulders, giving you the distinct impression that she has no neck. When she moves her head, it almost swivels around like an owl, but her face is distinctly human, with a feminine heart shape, and deep-set dark brown eyes, the colour of warm treacle. When I look into the Bigfoot's eyes, I realise she rescued me from that mountain lion on purpose. She intentionally saved my life. She looks at me with such a genuine concern. Her eyes smile at me warmly. They are filled with such generous love. "Are you all right?" she asks me in my head. "I'm so glad I saw you. He was going to eat you. You'll be safe here. I'll watch over you while you go to sleep." I stare at the Bigfoot in confounded disbelief. Did the creature actually just talk to me? She nods as if to affirm my doubtful thoughts. "Yes, I spoke to you in your head."
I'm amazed that the voice I hear in my head belongs to the Bigfoot. And more than that, she's read my mind. I'll take you back in the morning, she says. He'll be gone by then. I know she's talking about the mountain lion that attacked me. I realize I'm exhausted, so I take her up on her offer, and I go to sleep on the layers of soft moss. And when I awaken, I discover I'm covered in an animal skin. The Bigfoot is still guarding me, sitting by my side. She's just led me through the forest a short while ago and brought me back here. But it seems like that strange man must have got eaten by the mountain lion instead of myself. Niles and I saw him yesterday when we arrived at the campground. He acted like he was the campground manager, but he looked more like a vagrant. Everyone was astounded by Julian's amazing story, but we were in no doubt it was true, and for many of us the green-eyed monster reared its ugly head, for we would have loved an encounter with the mythical beast. Of course we informed the police about the deceased body. To date it remains a John Doe, for the strange man has not been identified, but the coroner did confirm the cause of death to be that of a mountain lion. As for my wedding, it was a marvellous success, and Julian did an excellent speech for me on a white screen, and no one batted an eyelid. So there you are, that's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Gladys, my aunt, was physically scared. She was shaking like a leaf, her pale blue eyes twinkling with an angst I'd never discerned before. Gladys was a proud, reserved woman who didn't easily show her emotions, as growing up her parents had taught her that revealing your feelings about things was a grievous weakness, so keeping a stoic, stiff upper lip was the dignified way for a lady to conduct herself. Gladys was now in her late 70s. Not a day had gone by in her life that she had been afraid of anything, until now. She was unable to disguise the trepidation on her face, as on this specific occasion it seemed that fear had torn away the mask, like the tinfoil on a ready meal, to expose the fragile vulnerableness that lay beneath. She had been married to her husband Walter for over 50 years. Walter was a scientist who had worked from home in a laboratory that had been built in close proximity to their farmhouse. In truth, it looked exactly like the house, remarkably similar, with the idea in mind that it could be later converted into a cottage when the property was one day sold. My Uncle Walter had funded his own research from a generous inheritance that he had procured from his wealthy, affluent father. Ostensibly, he made some prodigious breakthroughs in medicine. Much of his phenomenal research was suppressed, censored and repressed, as some of his preeminent findings would not make the kind of sizable money that Big Pharma was interested in acquiring, as there's an astonishing amount of money being made out of cancer and other diseases. By all accounts, in America alone, one person with cancer makes the medical profession easily over $70,000, and possibly more. It's a hell of a lot of money that they're not eager to lose. And if you find a cheap cure to any disease, it's likely to be clandestinely concealed, as well as the information being heavily sequestered and confidentially hidden, as it fails abysmally in complementing Big Pharma's nefarious money-making agenda. The problem with cures from nature is they can't be patented, so no sizable money can be made from natural cures. This happened once when scientists were unravelling the cancer curative properties discovered in the custard apple that could not be recreated synthetically in the laboratory, so the studies on the custard apple came to an immediate halt, despite the vast fortunes spent on the research, as the scientists could not recreate a successful acclaimed alternative. My uncle had learnt of alternative healthcare practitioners who had stumbled on breakthroughs in cancer, heart disease and diabetes, suddenly being found dead in their homes, in precarious, incredulous situations that left you wondering if their deaths were accidental at all. My uncle had told Gladys that he could not discuss his scientific findings with her, as he didn't want to put her life in perilous danger, which could ultimately happen if she knew too much. He told her that one day she might find him lying dead in an inexplicable situation, and if that were indeed the case, she would know that it was not a fortuitous accident. "Just so you know, Gladys," he had said, "I would never willingly take my own life." Gladys's story. My husband Walter adored science. His research was absolutely phenomenal. I was exceedingly proud of him as my husband. He couldn't be bought, bribed or manipulated by large medical organisations looking to become exceedingly wealthy. Walter had a desire in his heart to do great good by humanity. He was a brilliant man, but refused to discuss any of his findings with me in order to protect me. My husband would spend long hours during the day. He'd work for absolute ages in his laboratory, testing, experimenting, and examining his findings under his microscope, often growing all kinds of strange cultures, substances, and bacteria in petri dishes. If you walked into his laboratory, you would quite simply marvel at this Aladdin's cave of mystery and intrigue. My husband had animal parts like hearts and eyeballs pickled in brine. He had bottles and bottles of strange medical concoctions on shelves with very long scientific names. I remember one night he invited a scientist he regarded as a good friend to come and see something incredible he had discovered in his research, a clandestine secret that could potentially offer groundbreaking cures in some diseases. I'd never seen my husband so excited before, so I knew without a shadow of a doubt he had uncovered some kind of medical breakthrough. But what, I couldn't imagine. It seemed he had treated his sick mice with something. They had recovered and regained their health. In my husband's book, this was quite simply a momentous miracle. Even the most poorly mouse, hovering over the threshold of death by a fine silvery thread, had overcome death itself and was now robustly healthy. When my husband was feverishly stirred with enthusiasm, it would literally make me smile every time, inwardly and outwardly. I couldn't help myself. It would give me a thrill. My husband had what I called a happy walk, which involved him pacing up and down the house, rubbing his hands in glee, pursing his lips together in an ebullient, contented expression. "Oh, Gladys," he said to me with a massive grin on his face, "I've made a huge breakthrough. I wish I could tell you about it, but I can't." He told me he had called his scientist friend George around to observe the outstanding findings. When he said that, my heart literally sank. I didn't have a good feeling about this. I mean, how did he know he could trust George, whom he was calling around to our home? I had my distinct reservations. I mean, he didn't know the man very well. Supposingly he had been bought out by Big Pharma, blackmailed, bribed, and even personally threatened. This was my grievous concern. You see, big money talks. Some people will stop at nothing to ensure that cheaper breakthroughs in medicine don't get spilled out to the public. And if they do, they'll be booed by the media, so people will believe they can't be trusted. They'll go so far as they need to enforce their will, even if it means snuffing out the threat. I know many people will not believe that this sort of insidious stuff actually goes on in the world today, or that humanity can be this depraved. But believe me, the power of money can serve some duplicitous agendas and wicked motives, especially when controlled by powerful organizations and people that are swift to want to crush small businesses and entrepreneurial enterprises, not to mention the creative spirit within each and every one of us. And they can when they have lots of money. I begged Walter not to show any of his research to the scientist friend of his, George, in case they got leaked to Big Pharma, as we knew nothing about this man. Well, not really. "Please, Walter, don't show him any of your findings, unless you're 100% sure you can trust him." "I'm reasonably sure I can trust him." "Reasonably sure, Walter? That's not good enough, not by a long shot. Surely you of all people realise this. You're a great scientist, but you know what your problem is? You have too much of a trusting heart. You may be savvy and intuitive when it comes to your work, but by golly, you lack that same perception when it comes to people. You're not always the best judge of character. You could have got George horribly wrong, and if you have, you stand the great chance of putting your life in danger. You know we have to be scrupulously careful about who we trust." "Well, I married you, did I not, Gladys? I think that makes me an exceptionally good judge of character. I tell you what, when I bring the scientist into the house for a cup of tea, and if you give me the wink, I'll know that I have your approval to show him my breakthrough discovery. But if you scratch your nose and touch your chin, I won't show him a thing." "You promise?" I ask him.
"I promise,"
he assures me. I don't feel confident about my husband undertaking to make a solemn promise. It's no more reassuring than linking our pinky fingers together and making a pinky promise. It's not that I don't trust my husband to honour his troth, as Walter is a man of integrity and principle. What I don't trust is his ebullient enthusiasm that may be painstakingly difficult to restrain.
Rather like an excitable dog on a lead, desperate to meet another dog. He pulls so hard, he breaks free, darting over to the other dog, believing he's going to be received enthusiastically. The worst part of it all is there's not a thing you can do to stop him. Supposing the dog is a dangerous predator that rips and tears him to pieces. But Walter doesn't think about those kind of ramifications or choices, even when he's mindfully aware of the risks that they might engage. It's like he's always in denial. This is what Walter is like in a room of scientists when he's spending time with people who speak his kind of language, possessing a similar passion. In my experience, scientists are often zealous about their innovative, pioneering work. And why not? Wouldn't you be excited if you found something that had the capacity to change people's lives for the better? I know my husband is bursting at the seams to tell someone, anyone, about his quantum leap in the world of science, most especially a fellow accomplished scientist like himself, who can truly appreciate his incredulous discovery. But to what end? That's what I ask you. Understandably, it's got to be exceedingly difficult to suppress something you're hankering to share with the entire world that you know could potentially save lives, and lots of them. I'd seen my husband during his weaker moments, when his mouth had actually twitched. I had discerned him being on the threshold of surrendering some of his revolutionary scientific secrets to me, which I certainly didn't want to hear about, for the dangers they represented to my life. I'm glad to convey his desire to protect me, always overrid his ardent earnestness to spill the beans on some of his phenomenal discoveries. I've seen him bite his lip, reach out for an apple to eat in order to prevent himself from talking. So I'm not certain my husband has any willpower whatsoever to abstain from sharing his findings with a man with an innovative scientific mind like his own, who lives and breathes science like he does. The scientist called George promptly arrives at our home in a smart dark green gleaming Jaguar with expensive white leather seats. I ascertain he's got lots of money, not always a positive sign in a scientist, as he could be being bought by large corporations. When he climbs out of his vehicle, walking towards our front door, I welcome him into the threshold of our home warmly. He doesn't reciprocate my open friendliness at all. On the contrary, he appears rather cold, aloof, and indifferent towards me, as if I'm a lower form of pond life, not worthy of his attentive, polite consideration. I wonder to myself if he treats his poor wife with such indifference, disregard, and contempt. It's more than a little likely, I think. "Hello," he says. "You must be Walter's wife, Gladys." I observe that he appears as interested in me as a honeybee is in a can of sugarless cola. I notice he evades my eyes or any form of eye contact with me, which I find distinctly unsettling, rather shifty, and undisputingly rude. When I shake his handshake is limp, wet, and clammy, not pleasant at all. Everything about this enigmatic character is sounding loud warning bells in my head. I discern that George's expression changes dramatically when my husband enters the room. His demeanour shifts, his smile widens broadly. He slaps Walter on the back and says, "Good to see you, old man. It's been quite a while. I'd like to hear about what you've been getting up to on the science side of things. Any medical breakthroughs yet?" "It's good to see you too," says my husband in response. I bring in the tea on a silver tray. My hands are wobbling unsteadily and shaking, so that all the china cutlery rattles. I've already firmly decided that there is something distinctly off about this slippery character. I have this horrible gut feeling he may have been bought by Big Pharma. I put the tray on the large coffee table, along with a plate piled high with my homemade chocolate brownies. But the two men don't even notice me, despite my best efforts to get their undivided attention. But at this point I could throw a brick at the window, scream like a banshee at the top of my voice, or dance around the living room completely naked, and they're unlikely to even notice me. "Would you like some tea?" I say to George. Regretfully, both my husband and George fail to respond. They're so wrapped up in an animated conversation together that despite my very best efforts, it's as if I'm not even there in the room with them. This is not a new experience for me. I've learnt not to take offence, as scientists can behave like this when they're caught up in discussing scientific findings. Well, I've found that with Walter over the years. There are times he's been so absorbed and enthrallingly preoccupied in a project that he's even forgotten to eat breakfast, lunch and dinner. And on occasions when he's worked so solidly, for 2 days at a stretch, I found him lying crashed out on a sofa in his laboratory, finally having surrendered to sleep, after even the copious amounts of coffee have failed to keep him awake. Sometimes I don't mind admitting that I've envied his passion. I enjoy reading books, but never once has a book held my attention so much that I've forgotten to eat. I wish that would invariably happen. I might actually lose a couple of pounds, as I could do with missing a meal or two. I realise in that moment that the scratching of the nose and the touching of the chin to dissuade my husband from revealing his scientific discoveries to George is invariably not going to happen. Both men are just not giving me the time of day. "Walter," I say, but he just isn't listening. I would have to pour a bucket of ice-cold water over his head to actually get his attention. And even in my book, that's going way too far. Walter looks up at me for a brief moment very vaguely. I scratch my nose, touching my chin frantically, with an exaggerated pronunciation, but to no avail. My husband turns away from me. He continues his deep conversation with George. It's as if he's looking right through me, like a pane of glass, that he failed to actually see me. I know you might think my husband is being awfully rude towards me, but not at all. You have to fully appreciate his zealous passion for what he does. I watch both men gliding past me as Walter leads the way through our living room. He pushes open our sliding doors that open out onto a patio, and then he trails down the sandstone steps. They trudge towards the open front door of the laboratory, where they finally both disappear from my sight. The brownies and tea remain untouched. I know that nothing is going to stop Walter unleashing the cat out of the bag to the scientist called George. I can only hope he's not in cahoots with the dark side, but then you can never be sure about that. It's on a Friday night that I'm lying in bed, 3 days after my husband's rendezvous with George, who he admitted having shown him the results of his scientific research. "Why did you tell him?" I chide. "I kept scratching my nose, touching my chin, warning you off the man when he came to visit us, but you paid me absolutely no attention." "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I never saw you." "You're right about that, Walter," I exclaim. "It was like you looked right through me. I hope for your sake, Walter, that he doesn't work for the dark side, because if he does, we could be in a whole heap of trouble. Our lives could be in danger." "I'm sure he doesn't," said my husband. "He seems like a very nice man." "I'm sure people can be nice, especially the dark ones, when they have a nefarious agenda of some sort. Otherwise they wouldn't be able to win over the confidence of men like you." "Don't be like that, sweetheart. I'm sure we can trust him. Needless to say, I have to tell you, he was very blown away by my research. Excited about it, much like I am." "I hope you're right, Walter," I said, pulling the bedspread over my shoulders and going to sleep. I awake during the night to hear a loud clanging sound that arouses my attention. I sit up in bed with a start. In truth, it sounds like a couple of rambunctious, clumsy raccoons have tipped over our dustbin in the front yard. The noise reminds me of a wheelie bin being flung on its side. This is not unusual for our household. I've heard that familiar sound many times before, although tonight it's louder than usual. Walter groans. "Those goddamned raccoons! Heaven help us!" he exclaims. "If I don't go and sort the bins out, those raccoons will scatter so much mess all over our yard. I better go and fix the lids down tightly." My husband reaches for his tartan red and green dressing gown. He ties the cord around his middle. He slips into his slippers. "I won't be long, sweetheart," he whispers. I hear him trudging down the staircase, muttering under his breath about those bloody raccoons. I grunt because I'm sleeping, sliding back comfortably into my bed. I do hear some more bangs and crashes, but think nothing of it. Not even when I hear my husband saying, "Oh no! Oh no!" I assume he's appalled by the mess made by the raccoons. They're probably tin cans, leftover potato peelings, empty yogurt containers sprawled all over the front yard. Not a pretty sight. I slip off to sleep. I don't awaken until 8:30 the following morning, when the sunlight is filtering through a crack in our bedroom window. I glance briefly at my husband's side of the bed, but he's not there. He must have got up early, I think. I don't hear any sounds of Walter banging around in the kitchen, putting the coffee on, something he would always do. As for him, making coffee in the morning is a matter of routine. It helps us to wake up with a surge of caffeine swimming in our systems.
I climb out of bed somewhat reluctantly, my eyes still filled with particles of sleep. I really don't want to get up right now. My tangled grey hair is hanging around my face like wilting grey curtains. I place on my dressing gown. I potter down our ornate oakwood sweeping staircase towards our classical French-style kitchen. But I'm bewildered not to smell the familiar scent of coffee perforating the air with its aromatic bouquet. The kitchen remains undisturbed. It's remarkably quiet, apart from our cat Minxie crunching pellets hungrily on the kitchen counter. He looks up at me and purrs while he continues to eat. How can he purr and eat at the same time? That's something I've never understood. I stroke his silken soft grey fur very lovingly and say, "Where is your daddy this morning, Minxie?" My cat rubs his face affectionately against my chest, purring profusely. The soft sunlight filters through the windows, casting its twinkling shafts over the gleaming white quartz surfaces that sparkle in the morning light. My husband has made no coffee this morning, which is exceedingly odd, most unusual. The kitchen is far too clean. There's not a dirty coffee mug in sight. It looks the way I left it the night before. I glance out of the kitchen window. It is without doubt a magnificently beautiful day. It's early summer. The meadows sprawling out before me are viridescently green. The wooden picket fence that separates our yard, bordering our neighbour's field, where some of their black and bay American quarter horses are happily frolicking away, sparkles under the golden glaze of the morning light. The grass literally gleams under the carpets of moist dewdrops. Where the heck is my husband, I wonder? There's a strange ominous feeling that is nudging me, like a stranger in a shop tapping me on the shoulders to get my attention. The nudge feels cold, bodeful, inauspicious. It's a feeling that I refuse to accommodate. I just can't afford to go there. Of course everything is all right, I tell myself firmly. I walk out of my kitchen back door, ambling towards my husband's laboratory. The door has been left wide open. I smile to myself. Maybe my husband got up bright and early to pursue some of his gripping scientific research. He must have a bee in his bonnet about something exciting he stumbled upon. I smile as I think about how exuberant he becomes when he's on the precipice of a breakthrough. Sometimes he can remind me of a boy at Christmas opening his Christmas stocking. Maybe that's why he's up and about so early, I think. I push the door open with my hands a little wider. I am completely scandalized by the chaotic shambles and disarray that greet my eyes. My husband's laboratory looks like it's faced a tsunami. A mishmash of bottles lies strewn haphazardly across the floor, all broken, with pickled eyeballs and hearts lying scattered over papers like blobs of jelly, or dead sea fish on the seashore. My eyes sweep across the disordered turmoil, and then I see them. It would appear that lying through this jumbled, dishevelled mess is a pair of legs in pyjama bottoms plunged under a debris of fallen files. The legs remain ominously still. They belong to my husband. I recognise the green and white striped material at once. The sterile laboratory is soundless. In the stillness I can hear my inward screams and shrieks that shatter the pretentious silence with the baleful sense of foreboding that shoots through my system like fireworks crackling in the night sky on the 4th of July. For a moment, all remains stationary, tranquil, strangely calm. I'm frozen to the spot like an ice statue at a hotel banquet. And then a squeaky voice that I barely recognise comes out of the back of my throat. "Walter? Walter? Are you all right?" Of course he's not all right. I know this in my gut. But I don't want to face the sombre inevitability or reality of what I absolutely know I will find. My husband does not answer me. His legs remain still on the floor. My guts begin to recoil in terror. I move circumspectly towards my husband, gingerly pulling off the hodgepodge of files that have concealed his body. I scream. The sound that comes out of the back of my throat is so discomposing that it even frightens me. I wouldn't know I was capable of making a sound like that, until now. My husband has a plastic bag tied over his head, and within the plastic bag, his dead face looks blue. His eyes are glazed open like a dead fish. I scream again. It takes a long while for me to gather my senses together, for there is no order in this chaos.
I'm afraid the rest of that bleary, ambiguous, baleful day is all but a smoky, foggy haze in my memory that is so vague, so nebulously obscure, as my overwhelming grief seems to have vaporized so many of my recollections. It is like my mind is a spinning whirl of elliptical confusion, compounded by a convoluted fuliginous disbelief and an ineffable shock, as if all my thoughts have been tossed around like clothes in a spin-dryer. I do remember fleeting flashes of that day. The police, the ambulance, the flashing blue and red lights, the coroner's van, a policewoman calming me down with hot, sweet cups of tea, a doctor giving me tranquilizers, a policeman telling me it was all going to be all right. But how can anything be all right ever again? I hear one officer saying to another, "The wife's in shock. Call her son, will you?" My 40-year-old son arrives on the scene. He cradles me lovingly in his arms, kissing me on my hair, and like everyone else he assures me that everything's going to be all right. But his eyes are glistening with tears, his body shaking violently from the shock of losing his father so fortuitously. My son holds my hand in his. I think we're both giving each other strength. Officer Brown, the junior officer in charge of the case, sits down with his notepad and pen. "Do you mind if I ask you some questions, ma'am?" "Can't you see my mother is in shock, officer?" says my son indignantly. "Do you have to question her now? Can this not wait? Can you not see my mother is grieving? This has been a dreadful shock for her. We never expected my father to be lying dead, with a plastic bag over his head of all things." "It's all right," I say. "I want to find out what monster did this to my husband." Officer Terence Brown clears his throat. He's a young man in his 40s with a receding hairline, a kindly face, very big brown eyes. I can see he looks exceedingly uncomfortable. I imagine he never gets used to cross-examining grieving relatives, so I almost feel empathetic towards him. "There's no easy way to say this, ma'am, but we found a suicide note lying next to the body, saying I'm sorry. It looks like your husband put a bag over his head to suffocate himself. Was your husband suffering from depression? Did he give you any indication that he was unhappy?" I feel indignant. The angry blood passes through my veins like a steam train. I feel myself rising out of my foggy slumber, like a closed flower that suddenly perks up in a field under the first sprinkles of sunlight. I take offence at the officer's suggestion, as if someone has slapped me across my face with a cold hand. I need to defend Walter's corner. I know he'd never have committed suicide. "Officer, this was not a suicide. My husband would never kill himself. Someone deliberately killed him. They made it look like a suicide. Walter warned me that if I ever found him lying dead in his laboratory, or anywhere else for that matter, I must know that someone else took his life on purpose. He promised me wholeheartedly, officer, that he'd never intentionally take his own life. On the contrary, my husband loved life. He was excited to get up every single day. He was passionate about his work. Sometimes he was so excited about his research, he would remind me of a boy at Christmas having received a toy train. He was the last person in the world who would willfully take his own life." The officer's slouched back visibly straightens to attention. Even the pencil in his hands that is taking notes is trembling slightly. I notice his brown eyes studying me curiously. "You believe your husband's death was deliberately staged?" he asks me. His voice sounds grave and sombre. "Absolutely," I say. "My mother's right," says my son Jason. "Never in a million years, officer, would my father willingly take his own life. And the last thing he would ever do if he wanted to kill himself would be put a bag over his own head. My father was a scientist. There are easier, less obtrusive ways to kill yourself, you know." "If you believe your husband's death was staged, Mrs. Call me Gladys," I say. I never stand on ceremony. "Well, Gladys, could you tell me why you think anyone would willingly harm your husband? Why do you believe his death was staged? Did he have any enemies you know about?" "People like my husband always have enemies, officer. He is a private scientist working for himself. You see, my husband is an ethical, decent man, well, he was, who couldn't be bought, bribed, or manipulated by major pharmaceutical organizations that are owned by the elite, who want to shut up the mouths of scientists and natural health practitioners that find cures for major diseases that are unlikely to make much money for them. You see, officer, there are people high up in our society who love money. They can't get enough of it. You know the saying, officer, from the Bible, whoever has money never has enough of it. Everything, officer, in this world of ours is dictated by money at the end of the day, as brutal as that may sound. And so many of us have been indoctrinated to believe that Big Pharma has all the answers to our health care, but that isn't necessarily true. That is what they want us to believe. There are natural ways people can be cured, but anything from nature cannot be patented, so it's not going to bring in the big bucks. That presents a major problem to the pharmaceutical industry. If you have a plethora of money, Officer Brown, your big money can be very useful in eliminating the bugging mosquitoes that represent a threat to the success of your industry. So what do you do to swat them? You exterminate them. My husband is like the irritating mosquito that they want to exterminate. I agree with you wholeheartedly, says Officer Brown. Everything in this world is about money. So many of the big businesses crush the small family-run businesses. It's grievously sad, very iniquitous. You see, it's happening all around the world. It happened to my parents' grocery business, so I know all about this. He pauses for a moment. If what you are saying is true, someone deliberately tried to kill your husband. Why now, at this point in time, may I ask you? Officer, he stumbled on a breakthrough in kidney disease. I gleaned that much from him. I don't know the details. My husband chose to protect me from knowing too much. He said if I knew all about the breakthroughs, my life would be in perilous danger. I know the mice he was treating had dysfunctional kidneys. His medical breakthrough enabled the mice to regain perfect kidney health. Do you realize what an incredible breakthrough such a discovery is for medicine? It would seem 3 days ago he shared his findings with a scientist friend of his, whom he thought he could trust, a man called George McAvoy. I met the man. There was something shifty about him. I think he might be a whistleblower. He's working for the big guns behind Big Pharma. Don't you think it's suspicious, officer, that all my husband's files have been scattered all over the place, as if someone is searching for something? Whoever took Walter's life was possibly looking for his recent notes on his discoveries, so he could burn them up and destroy them. You see, Walter made physical notes, which he files away, as well as computer records. Needless to say, his computer has vanished. I ask you, officer, if my husband committed suicide, where is his computer? That's what I was saying to Officer Penrose, said Officer Brown, that this case does not bear the hallmark characteristics of a suicide at first glance. Someone turned the place upside down, as if they're searching for something of vital significance. No man who commits suicide goes turning his laboratory or home upside down. It's irrational, illogical, nonsensical to do, by all accounts. And it seems your husband is a fastidious man. I pointed out his neat, meticulous scientific notes that he had filed away. No one who is this meticulous messes up the place when committing suicide. I did search the premises for a computer, but there was none on site. So you're right about that. It appears to have vanished. A computer doesn't disappear after a suicide. That is another conundrum. I know Officer Penrose knows I'm right about this. He lowers his voice to a whisper. Even our police force can be infiltrated by the big guns behind major organizations, I'm afraid to say. Even they can be bought. I was saying to Officer Penrose, something is not right here. I watched him and the coroner exchange furtive glances together. Officer Penrose said to me, "This is an open and shut case. The man committed suicide. It's straightforward." The coroner agreed. But I observed some red marks on his hands that looked like he'd been cuffed when the bag had been tied over his head. I showed the red lines on his hand to the coroner. She said it was nothing, but that wasn't nothing. Someone tied up your husband's hands so that he couldn't remove the bag from his head. He told me I didn't need to interview you, Officer Penrose, that is. The case is not cut and dry. The moment I walked into the laboratory, I knew something smelt rank. In my opinion, ma'am, Your husband's death was not a suicide.
Thanks, I say, mopping my eyes. Thank you for believing me, Officer Brown. That means more than you'll ever know.
The trouble is, ma'am, says Officer Brown, I can't go against my superior. I hope you appreciate that. If he and the coroner confirm your husband's death is a suicide, there is nothing I can do to persuade them to change their findings without risking losing my job. I have a family to feed, expensive school fees to pay. If I didn't, I would stick my neck on the line for you. But, madam, I'm sorry for your loss. I believe you. I believe your husband's death was not a suicide.
Officer Brown had been absolutely right. Nothing more was said about my husband's suspicious death. The cause of death on the coroner's report was identified as suicide. I appreciated that Officer Brown had gone out of a limb to admit to me that he believed that Walter's death was not a suicide. Of course, I knew better than to query the coroner's report or kick up any kind of fuss. I didn't want what happened to my husband to happen to me. A wife shouting the odds is a mouth that may need shutting up or being silenced. One night, 2 weeks after Walter's death, I'm lying curled up in my bed, sleeping in the fetal position, with Minxie lying in my arms, fast asleep. That's when I hear a loud banging sound, similar to the night when my husband had died, when I was certain he'd cried out, "Oh no! Oh no!" which I thought was his appalled reaction to the mess that the raccoons had left behind. Now I'm certain that that was the sound he made when a plastic bag was thrust over his head, and his hands were tied behind his back, while he was suffocated to death. I hate to even reflect over my husband's last hours on this earth plane. I can only hope he didn't suffer, but a small part of me feels that he might have. I'm racked with guilt about that. I feel responsible for his unheralded death. None of this would have ever transpired if I'd managed to stop my husband from blabbing to George in the first place. I am certain that George is behind my husband's inadvertent death. I remember when I met him, I instinctively disliked his uncongenial, pompous, rather haughty manner. If only I'd paid more attention to the banging sounds that inauspicious night, which we had grievously mistaken for raccoons, I might have been able to save my husband's skin, although I'm not entirely sure that this is true. I'm sitting up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest so very fast. I can hear every single beat. The banging sound is like large dustbins clanging against each other, but it seizes my attention sharply. With a pronounced sense of consternation, I'm now convinced that raccoons are not raiding my bin. This is definitely another noise. I quickly grab an iron rod from the fireplace in my bedroom, cautiously climbing down the sweeping staircase. I was quick to put on a pair of trainers, as wearing slippers might be a treacherous, slippery mistake to make, especially if there is someone loitering around my farmhouse. I might need to defend myself. It's when I'm in the kitchen that I see a glowing light coming from my husband's laboratory. Oh my God! The laboratory door is wide open. Someone is in there ferreting around. I was sure I'd locked it. Maybe the intruder has a skeleton key. I creep stealthily and cautiously towards the laboratory. I can see a man poking through my husband's folders. I know he must be after the silver folder that contains my husband's latest scientific breakthroughs. I creep forwards in the darkness. My visibility is compromised and obscured. I collide clumsily into a wheelbarrow that I forgot was in the yard. It makes a loud crashing sound. I see the light swiftly going out in the laboratory. I hear a man's feet darting away. I pull myself unsteadily off the ground, observing the stranger. He's dashing over the neighbour's fence, running through their yard. I get the distinct impression he's young, a rather handsome-looking man in his 20s. Not someone you would ever think was capable of this kind of nonsensical, iniquitous behaviour. I watch him now, hurrying towards the thicket of trees, which finally meets the road, where I imagine that's where his car is possibly waiting in the wings, ready for him to make a hasty escape. I then drag myself back into the house, calling my niece. I can't be alone right now. I just can't. Someone was meddling around in my husband's laboratory, looking for the silver file, which I stealthily hid under my bed, possibly not wisely. I'm now beginning to feel like a hunted animal, really afraid. What if this man comes back? What if he does to me what he did to my husband? Farron's account. I'm lying in my bed when the cell phone rings. I feel annoyed. I've had a restless night tonight. The last thing I want is to answer my telephone. Besides, who bothers to ring at this outrageous time of night? Unless, of course, it's important. I groan as I briefly glance at caller ID. My aunt's name Gladys lights up my cell phone. I'm now wide awake. I've been worried about Gladys of late. I've been anxious that the people behind my uncle's unconventional, idiosyncratic death might actually try and kill my aunt. It's a niggling, arresting, pervasive feeling that has bothered and provoked my conscience, assiduously haunting my darkest nightmares, eclipsing my ability to sleep. I know that the people behind this duplicitous crime will naturally want to clean up any loose, untidy ends. That's what people like this willfully do. That's how they skillfully, clandestinely operate. They keep their invisible crimes stealthily hidden in the dark shadows, out of the light of public scrutiny. They get away with their devious, unprincipled actions, for they have infested every avenue of our society, and benevolently live among us, so we don't even know who they are. Supposing my Aunt Gladys is a loose end that needs cleaning up. Let's not forget for a moment that Uncle Walter's laboratory was raided recently. What if they do not get what they're looking for? They could potentially come back. That invariably puts my aunt's life at perilous risk. I had discussed all these distinct possibilities with my aunt, but she was insistent that she wanted to stay at the farmhouse, where I wasn't entirely sure she'd be safe. My aunt lived outside of Seattle in the countryside, an hour and a half away from my apartment in downtown Seattle. "Gladys, is everything all right?" I ask. "Someone broke into Walter's laboratory a moment ago. I'm scared. I know they're after the silver file." "I'm coming now, Aunt Gladys. Stay there. I'll be there soon." I throw on jeans and a sweatshirt. Before I know it, I'm driving as fast as I can to my aunt's farmhouse. Then it dawns on me what needs to be done. We absolutely have to destroy all of Walter's work, including the silver file. This is the only way that these wicked people will leave us alone. It's the only thing that will ensure Aunt Gladys's safety. As my car winds down the long cobbly driveway towards Gladys's farmhouse, she comes dashing towards me, still clad in her dressing gown and pyjamas. Her face is as white as a sheet. We embrace warmly, so delighted to see each other. But I can feel her body is trembling. "You're right, Fallon," she says, her blue eyes filled with trepidation. "I think I'm in danger, but I don't want to leave my beautiful home. But you know, even if I do, these people, whoever they are, they'll stop at nothing to find me. They're looking for the silver file of Walter's, that they think is still hidden in the laboratory, but I've been hiding it under my bed. You shan't be moving out of your farmhouse, I say. I've got a grand idea. We need to burn all of Uncle Walter's paperwork, including the silver file, I'm afraid. We need to get his laboratory cleared out. The perpetrators want all Uncle Walter's hard work destroyed, so that no one else gets their hands on this information. They want nothing leaked. If all the evidence is destroyed, they'll leave you alone." "But do you really think it'll work?" asks my Aunt Gladys, looking sadly reflective. "Do you know, it would break Walter's heart to see all his hard research going up in smoke. It's so unfair." "Not if it means keeping you alive and saving your skin. If Walter knew your life was threatened, he would want you to burn his work up to protect you. I know he would. In the meantime, Aunt Gladys, I really must insist that I stay with you at night. I have my dad's hunting rifle here with me. I'm licensed to use it. It's in the trunk of my vehicle. I'll sleep with you in your bedroom at night. If I hear anyone rummaging around on your property, I'll fire after them with the rifle to scare them the hell off your property. No one has the right to scare you half to death like this. It makes me sick to my stomach thinking of what these heinous psychopathic people are capable of." I'm glad to say that clearing out Uncle Walter's laboratory went much more smoothly than we anticipated. We burnt his work in a large drum. We watched the fire burning everything up. The paper curled as it burnt. Gladys's eyes teared up as she watched Walter's years of research going up in smoke. But I know she knew we were doing the right thing. Yes, it was sad, but it was something that had to be done. Of course, getting rid of some of the dangerous chemicals was a job that required professional help. But in no time, the house that had once been Uncle Walter's laboratory was now turned into a rentable cottage. I had been staying in Gladys's bedroom with her every night, sleeping on the opposite side of her king-size bed. when I was awoken to a banging sound coming from outside the property. Gladys woke up. Her eyes were round with terror.
I think the man is back. I think he's back to finish what he started. What are we going to do? Supposing he breaks into the house? He's after the silver file, I know he is.
You stay there, I said, grabbing the rifle from underneath the bed and hastily putting my sneakers on.
Should I call the police? Asked Gladys.
No, there's no need, I said. I'm going to see what's going on. I put on my head torch and scuttle outside. That's when I see the young man. He's just broken open the laboratory door. He's standing there with a nonplussed, bewildered expression on his face. He stares vacantly at the laboratory to see that it's completely cleared out. He doesn't look like the insane maniac I was expecting to see, but like a rather young, handsome-looking man.
Hey, you, I call after him. This is private property. What are you doing here?
The man sees me pointing my rifle at him. His face begins to panic. He has a rifle, but he's left it lying on the ground. I quickly retrieve it. He's not exactly savvy, which I find rather surprising. I had pounced on him unaware, like a loitering lion in the undergrowth, and he hadn't even seen me coming. I feel no fear towards this man, only indignance and anger. He has the brazen audacity to try and break into my uncle's laboratory. Could he be the man that killed my uncle? This ominous thought makes the bile rise up in the back of my throat. But this man, he has kind eyes, and he's young.
Don't shoot, says the man holding up his hands. Don't shoot, please. Why did you kill my uncle? Was it you that put a plastic bag over his head? It was you that smothered him to death. I know it was. Your uncle was a very bad man. I was told he was producing dangerous airborne viruses in his laboratory, designed to kill innocent people in the world. He needed to be killed. Someone had to do the job. I was doing the world a favour getting rid of him. People like him are treacherous traitors to humanity. They need to be dealt with. I feel about this very, very strongly. So you admit you smothered my uncle with a plastic bag? I say, positioning the rifle at his head. You do realise I could blow your head right off. I told you, your uncle was a very bad man. He deserved what he had coming to him. People like him deserve to rot in hell. They're the piranhas of our society. Who told you that my uncle was a bad man? The man who paid me to get rid of him. He gave me the classified information, he said, handing me a piece of paper, which I scan with horror. You do realise that this is all lies? Granted, it looks official and legitimate, but I promise you none of this is remotely true. You've been set up. Who is this man that paid you to get rid of my uncle? I don't know him personally. I've already said too much. All I know is he told me that your uncle was a very bad man, with a duplicitous agenda that would cost innocent human lives if he was allowed to get away with his science. You do realise this is all absolute lies. Granted, it looks official and legitimate. I'll give you that. But I promise you, none of this is remotely true. You've been guilefully set up. Who is this man that paid you to get rid of my uncle? I don't know. I've already probably said too much. All I know is he informed me that your uncle is a very, very wicked man, with a duplicitous agenda that will cost human innocent lives. You're an idiot. How could you do something so recklessly idiotic, without even realising what you're doing? Let me give you a word of advice, if I may. I don't care how official or classified the information may appear that you receive. There are evil people in this world of ours, real psychopaths. I know this because of my uncle's work. Over the years, he's received numerous death threats based on his research. Don't believe everything someone tells you. Not everything you hear is true. You've been exploited by powerful, affluent people, most probably, in high positions in our society, who have lied to you for their own agenda. If you must know, my Uncle Walter was the kindest man you could ever hope to meet. He was working for the good of humanity, finding cures for diseases, to make the world a better place. My uncle would never harm the hair on a man's head. Someone got you to kill my uncle, under false pretenses, so that you falsely believed that you were doing humanity a favour, when the reverse is actually true. You mean I killed an innocent man? Says the young man, his face growing white with horror. Oh, my God! Oh, my God, what a fool I've been. His eyes cloud over with tears. He actually cries. I'm struck by how young and naive he is. I almost feel sorry for him. That's exactly what I mean. The man's face looks crestfallen. I work for a team of vigilantes, he explains to me. We're all young. Our aim is to make the world a much better, safer place. We are given inside information on traitors to our nation that need elimination. We're paid good money to surreptitiously complete the jobs. We don't mind exterminating evil men. It's for a good cause. You shouldn't accept what you're told as fact. Some of the people that might be hiring you may be exceedingly nefarious. You could potentially be killing good men, like my Uncle Walter, who was doing great things for humanity. You really need to watch your backs. There he is! Over there, says the man. That's the man that employed me to kill your uncle, over there. He asked me to come back to look for a Pacific silver phial that contains the deadly recipe for the pathogen your uncle is supposed to have created. He's insisted that the information is in a silver phial. But last time I was here, I couldn't find it anywhere. He informed me he'd come to help me look for it tonight. He knows what it looks like. He's the one that told me your uncle was a traitor to the nation, needing taking down. He gave me the classified paperwork. I recognise this man at once. He's a scientist my Uncle Walter has known over the years called George. I did meet him a couple of times at my uncle's barbecue. I never liked him. The vigilante grabs his rifle from my hand and begins to fire after George involuntarily. I can see he's seething with anger. George has not seen either of us. But when a rifle is fired after him, he flinches. His eyes grow as round as saucers. He observes me standing with the vigilante. You manipulated me! You made me kill an innocent man! How could you? I have to live with the guilt on my conscience! You lied to me! I'm going to kill you for that! George begins to hightail it through the backyard. He climbs speedily over the fence, running across the field towards the thick thicket of trees, with me and the vigilante in hot pursuit of him. I'm running after George, who I've gleaned is clearly a scientist working for the dark side of some large corporation that wants to shut people like my Uncle Walter up due to his groundbreaking research. I want answers. I want to find out who these obscure elitists are who hired George on their behalf to eliminate people using the services of well-meaning vigilantes who are being recruited by wolves in sheep's clothing in order to get their nefarious jobs done under the guise of doing a good service for humanity. It makes me sick to my stomach. Gladys confided in me that she never trusted George the scientist. Just one look at his sheepish, incriminating face. I know he's guilty of this heinous crime. He's behind recruiting this young man in killing my uncle on behalf of the big guns. Before long, we're running in the woodgrove as fast as we possibly can. Both me and the vigilante are firing after George, but we keep missing him with our shots. George is a scheming, treacherous, devious, crafty character with the unscrupulous personality of a black mamba. He seems quite capable of dodging our bullets. Even though he's not at all athletic, he's actually pathetically puny. I'd never normally shoot after a man, but if someone is responsible for killing a much-loved member of my family, I'm sorry the boundaries have shifted dramatically. The rule of law does not apply as far as I'm concerned. I need to stand up for my Uncle Walter and the good that he represented. On the face of it, under no circumstances am I ever going to let a rattlesnake like George, this pompous, self-righteous, arrogant, whistle-blowing scientist, get away with his guileful iniquities and treacherous betrayal of my uncle's great inspirational work. The forest is dark and menacing. The trees, with their tall, vertical humanoid shapes, stand up like proud giants in the velvety, black, tenebrous infirmament, their pointed heads reaching up into the twilight, while their needled boughs swagger slightly in the whistling wind that swooshes through the forest as it howls like an angry, formidable, yowling cat. The moonlight is not generous or accommodating on this bodeful, inauspicious night, almost as if the forest itself has sided with the evil that cloaks it in a heavy oppression that is so tangible you can actually feel it sucking the oxygen directly out of your lungs, leaving you feeling breathless and faint with exhaustion. Me and the vigilante are valiantly undaunted. Both of us have revved up the engines of our bodies significantly, like two powerful motorbikes, as we pursue George relentlessly.
I wish the moon wasn't stealthily hiding in the shadows so that our visibility is clandestinely shrouded, so that there are ambiguous, indeterminate moments when George's fleeing body disappears and almost vanishes from sight. I thank God I'm wearing a head torch on my head, trainers on my feet, as I glide over the tumultuous rocky earthen floor, over a rich confetti of fallen twigs and leaves that rustle and snap under my rubber heels. My heart is racing like a speedboat. Sweat is gathering between my collarbones and the back of my neck. Even my long brown hair has not been unaffected by the moist humidity, the steam that my body has engendered. As I run, I can see the obscure shapes of ferns and underbrush that fringes our pathway. The viridescence of the fauna and flora has been pilferaged, as it surreptitiously accommodates this dusky darkness with baleful silhouettes that rather remind me of evil gnomes that almost appear to be mocking us. They only add to the uncongenial, hostile feeling of this woodland oasis. We can see George's back slipping through the woods. He moves with the stealth of a robber, the speed of a fast animal. I secretly rather suspect an adrenaline rush has given him a quintessential edge, as people are capable of performing great feats under her powerful influences, where mothers have lifted up cars to rescue their trapped kids, and people have grabbed high tree branches to escape a charging rhinoceros. I barely notice that the crickets on this night have failed to chirp. The frogs have abandoned their croaking duties, for the whistling wind hammers and pounds the trees, with such forceful thrusts that they almost sigh and creak in response. A loud roar seems to ring through the forest like a resounding bell. My first thought is, what the hell is that? The sound is reminiscent of a powerful predator, like a tiger or a lion. A great uneasy trepidation consumes me. One part of me wants to hightail it back to the house as quickly as I can, but that would mean giving up chasing George. I'm not about to stop pursuing this contemptuous man. I want to confront him for what he did. Yet I sense something potentially deadly and dangerous is watching us. I can feel these unseen eyes. They seem to be scanning us like an X-ray machine, going right through us. There's an anger bubbling inside me that refuses to be hushed, a fury that cannot be tamed, an audacious determination that cannot be ignored. I need to catch up with George, and this gripping need is so insatiable, like a dreadful thirst that has to be quenched. I have to seek answers from this iniquitous man. I'll be damned if I give up chasing him now, as I may never get another chance again. I know without a shadow of a doubt that Mr. Vigilante is very likely to blow his brains out. Do I care? Not at all. The moment George betrayed my uncle with his vicious lies and rumours so that he could get someone to do his vindictive, treacherous bidding, he earned this life sentence. He brought it on himself. I, for one, have no pity for a man like him. All of a sudden, an overlong, hairy arm reaches out to grab George, like a large tree trunk that has tripped him up, knocked him right over. George is flung to his feet. I hear him audibly groan, as if he's twisted an ankle. Good. I hope it hurts a lot. I hope he's suffering. He's trying to get up, but his body is pinned under this hefty tree trunk. The tree trunk begins to move on its own, and as my torchlight catches the tree trunk, I realise it's a large hairy leg, attached to a very big foot. But as my eyes travel upwards to the height of about 8 foot, I'm astonished to find myself staring at this massive creature, which I realise at once is a Bigfoot. Indeed, I'm so dumbfounded that I just gawk at the critter, as if I'm caught up in a surreal dream. This can't be happening. No way! This Bigfoot isn't real. Surely not. A fictitious creature from the pages of pulp fiction. I mean, that is what I've always assumed a Bigfoot is. But as I stand there in the forest, I come to the stunning revelation that this is no dream. What I'm perceiving now is not a trick of the light, nor an object of an over-elaborate imagination. I am completely out of breath. I stop running, with a young vigilante standing by my side. I don't even know his name yet. I can hear his fast, rapid breathing. You would think the two of us would run away as fast as we could from this place, but we are engaged in what I can only describe as such awe and wonderment on seeing this unorthodox, idiosyncratic creature, that fear eludes us, as if it has failed to entertain our very thoughts, not even for a brief second. Every part of my body flutters with an electric excitement, for I am intrigued and mystified by this incredible creature. Until now, I thought held its place of prominence in children's legends. My mother once told me when I was a little girl that legends aren't fabrications, but they actually have their origins in truth. She told me that the cat-like humanoids that are prominently seen in Egyptian hieroglyphics possibly existed at one time and lived among the pharaohs in Egypt. Some people believe that they're off-world extraterrestrials that still exist today, living on other planets. I'm open to believing in anything now. I'm seriously beginning to wonder if my mother's right. For if indeed Bigfoot is real, why should I doubt the depictions so vividly and meticulously recorded outside the ancient tombs and pyramids? As why would the ancient Egyptians fastidiously document anything that wasn't actually real? I discern that the Bigfoot's exceptionally large foot is pinning down George with a forceful hold, from which he cannot escape. I'd like to reiterate this is one foot he's using. That's how extraordinarily strong he is. The Bigfoot studies us through his astute, sharp-witted, deep-set, expressive eyes that are the colour of rich burnt caramel. It really feels as if he's reading us like a book. I notice his human-like face has a noble, regal quality about it, as if he's someone of prominent importance and high standing, maybe among his own kind. For his outer worldly, engaging, convivial presence has a kingly quality about him, rather like Aslam in the fictional children's book, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. I just sense this Bigfoot's intelligence and a spiritual depth about him that seems almost angelic, as strange as that sounds. I'm completely caught off guard and very gobsmacked when I hear the words in my head, "What must I do with him? His heart is blacker than death. His soul is mottled with evil intent. His mind is sprouting with the shoots of an insatiable greed. He works for those secret societies in your world who worship Lucifer, of which there are many, hiding in the dark shadows of your people, in positions of great power and influence. He must be taken out, for his kind are like the weeds in the valley, the barren fruitless trees in the orchard, the guileful flames of a wildfire, the treacherous winds of a cyclone. The Bigfoot is speaking to us with such soulful, poetic words. I glance up at the vigilante. I realise he also has audibly heard the Bigfoot's poignant words as well. He looks as bewildered as I do, almost unable to fathom that this creature has spoken to us so eloquently in our heads, with a shrewd, perspicacious intelligence and an intuitive, discerning perception. How is that even possible, to speak audibly without words in our head? Who is this Bigfoot, I wonder? Where does he come from? How can he know the condition of a man's heart, like he appears to know George's? The Bigfoot hears my thought. He answers my own internal dialogue, as if I've asked him the question myself. He can hear thoughts like we might hear the sound of a rock being flung into a rock pool. I can see auras, read minds, hear and see the intents of a man's heart, and even look back at a person's life to see who he really is, what he's done. Yes, it's a superpower humans like you do not possess. Now, what do you want me to do with him? For this man needs to be expunged, for he is a rotten fruit that needs casting aside. For his seed is rotten, his fruit is as bitter as gall. Don't do anything to him at the moment, I say in my head. Keep your foot firmly on him. Keep holding him down. I have to ask him questions. I need to know why he got this vigilante here to kill my uncle. You think this man will tell you the truth? Comes a Bigfoot's voice in my head. This man does not embrace truth, for truth is as foreign and alien to him as the words of a sagacious wise man and the innocence of a child. If you want to know why he killed your uncle, think about how much the darkness hates the light, how greed hates modesty, how wealth hates scarcity, how evil hates good, and you will have your answer. Why? I scream at George. Why did you lie to this man here? Why did you get him to smother my uncle with a plastic bag? Why would you do such an evil thing? Why would you make him think he's doing a service to humanity? George spits at me. He glares at me through his dark, soulless eyes. In that moment, I know he won't reveal anything to me. He tries to fight back, oscillating his arms, trying to relinquish his legs. But the Bigfoot's holding him down with his foot very hard, with just one leg, and he's gripped under the Bigfoot's weight, as if he's pinned under a tractor. "You can do what you want to this man," says the vigilante, speaking loudly to the Bigfoot, so that George can actually hear his words. "As long as you wipe the smug, self-satisfied look off his face, I will be happy. He made me put a plastic bag on an innocent man's head. I have to live with the guilt of what I have done now." I hear the Bigfoot's words to the vigilante. "You need to engage wisdom, young man. Your heart is good. Your desire to eliminate evil from this earth, highly commendable. They have lied to you. You have fed on their lies, believing their claims to be true. You need to employ wisdom. You do not do the bidding of another until you know that they are telling you the truth. You need to seek always the truth in your heart before you act impulsively and do something that you might later live to regret. It is good to weed out evil, but don't pull out the good crop by mistake, for that good crop has much to offer humanity. Don't you ever forget that. Before you ever kill a man, look into his eyes, for they are the mirror of his soul. For in the heart of the evil one, you will only see darkness, and there will be no light." George's eyes grow round with terror after hearing the vigilante's words. "Please, please don't let that Bigfoot kill me. Please, I'll tell you everything you need to know. Please, I'm paid very big money to stop scientists like this lady's uncle here from revealing miracle cures that won't make lots of money. You see, everything's about money." "Who pays you?" "I don't know their names personally. They're not stupid enough to be identified. I speak to people on the telephone. They use a voice changer, so I don't know who they are. They're important, rich, powerful people. They definitely run the world. Money gets transferred to my account, but they pay me big bucks for people like me who can stop scientists from releasing natural cures to the world, because they can never make a man rich. Those kind of cures can never make a man rich." The Bigfoot grabs George. The man screams, "Please, no, no!" In a second, with one hand, the Bigfoot tugs off George's head, like plucking a grape from a vine, and with his foot he kicks the head, like a ball on the forest floor, where it lands somewhere in the shrubbery. I don't know where. "That was quick," he said. "The evil's gone now." The forest begins to change, as a beautiful moonlight twinkles through the canopy. A soft, gentle, silvery light dances through the shrubbery. Everything feels lighter, as if a weight has been lifted off our shoulders. And yes, the world feels like a better place, infinitely brighter, without George here. The Bigfoot nods at us and says, "May the good Lord be with you. May he bless you both." He turns to the vigilante. "You must heed my advice, young man. Don't be quick to do good, unless you're sure it is good you are doing." He then nods, and he glides away. The vigilante tells me his name is Benjamin Armstrong. He's actually a really nice guy, but I can't shake off what he's done. I can't get over the fact that he killed my uncle. "Please," he says to me, "I need to speak to your aunt. I need to apologize for what I've done, for my complete stupidity and foolishness." "What, so that you feel better?" I say. "I'm sorry, Benjamin, but what you did, even if you thought it was for good, was wrong. My aunt has to live without my uncle now because of you." "I'm not making excuses for myself, I promise you. If I hadn't killed your uncle, George would have found someone else to do it. I do need to speak to your aunt. I beg you. It's very important for me." "Be it on your own head," I say. "But my aunt found my uncle with a plastic bag over his head. You don't get over an image like that. I don't know how she could ever forgive you, even if you did it out of innocence." When I return to the farmhouse, my aunt is in the backyard. Her face looks petrified. She relaxes when she sees me. "Where the hell have you been?" she asks, her face looking terrified. "Who is this?"
My name is Benjamin Armstrong, says the young man. We live in a world where there is much evil, madam. All my life I've wanted to eliminate evil. As if one apple is rotten, it contaminates the whole barrel. I am desirous to make this world a much better place, where people can live together in peace in an atmosphere of love. I received a phone call from George, who claimed he had received classified information that your husband was an exceedingly evil man, working for Agenda 21, a depopulation agenda, where he wanted to eliminate innocent civilians in our world. They needed someone from our vigilante group to exterminate your husband, who was a scientist researching a lethal pathogen that would kill millions. Something like Ebola, I imagine. I knew that such a wicked man needed elimination fast.
And you believed my husband was this evil man? Is that what you're telling me?
I am so sorry, madam. I am so sorry. There are just no words. There are no words.
The tears are streaming down his cheeks.
I never meant to harm your husband. If I had known he was innocent, I wouldn't have touched him with a barge pole. I'm so sorry.
Did he suffer? My aunt asks. Walter, I mean, my husband.
It was over very quick, madam.
Good, says my aunt. You're a lot like my husband, Benjamin. He was like you. He wanted to eliminate the evil from this world. But I can see you've been deceived by powerful men. They hide in the dark shadows, deceiving the millions with their guileful agendas. I know, because I've had to live through this with my husband. I can't hate you for that, but I will say this. Next time, please make sure you know what you're doing, because mistakes like this cannot be unmade. But if you're seeking my forgiveness, I forgive you, as you knew not what you were doing. The Bible tells us to do just that. But remember this, knowledge is power. So research the truth. Never believe everything you're told, regardless of who's telling you it, because it might not be true. To my amazement, my aunt actually embraces Benjamin, the very man that put a bag over my uncle's head. I can hardly believe it. But they're both embracing each other. They're both crying. And my mother really seems to like Benjamin. She really has forgiven him. To cut a long story short, there was a write-up in the paper about a brilliant scientist called George found dead in the woodgrove by my aunt's neighbours. The manner of death was registered as unexplained, exceedingly bizarre. But that is the end of the story. So there you are. That's my story.
All I want to say is that all of us know what it's like. I don't know how many of you have searched for Bigfoot and tried to find him. Well, tonight's story is all about that. We have a man who searches for Bigfoot, and when he's not looking, Bigfoot shows himself. So let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Trevor, and ever since of the age of 15, I was exposed to an incredible television program called Finding Bigfoot. I had a burning, insatiable desire and hunger to find this mysterious, hairy humanoid that I was so strangely drawn to. I was not on a mission to prove to the world that Bigfoot was real by any manner of means. On the contrary, I didn't care about that scientific stuff at all. I just wanted my own personal one-on-one encounter with a Bigfoot. I was so intrigued, mystified and curious about such an extraordinary being like this, living in our forests in North America. And if all these so-called personal sightings of Bigfoot were indeed true, and not spurious, then I wanted a taste of that apple pie for myself, even if I had to travel from one bakery to another, if you catch my drift, to find that perfect apple pie. In this case, of course, it would be from one area of natural forest to another, looking for a fleeting, remote chance of an encounter with the hairy humanoid. I had heard all kinds of Bigfoot stories, from horrifying accounts with the beast, where people would say that if they never saw this grotesque monster ever again, it would be way too soon. Then there were others who'd experienced benign encounters with the criature, sometimes feeling terrified, other times fascinated and even awe-inspired in a seemingly quick, ever so brief encounter.
while there were others whom had been literally had their lives physically, emotionally, and mentally changed and transformed by the hairy humanoid. It would seem that there were not only highly individualistic species of these Bigfoot-like creatures living in North America with varying hair colours and physical appearances, but creatures with a wide array of seemingly human-like temperaments, from the kind and maternal to the ferocious, aggressive, volatile, and sometimes even deadly. I was so in awe of a creature that clearly had managed to escape the scrutiny of human beings for such a long time, and had managed successfully to remain hidden in the shadows, despite how much logging we've done in recent years. Granted, there are vast areas of unexplored American wilderness that have barely been touched by humans, apart from a fleeting visit from a lone hiker or adventure seeker from time to time. Of course, over many generations, there have been thousands of personal eyewitness encounters with these creatures. But despite all this, every single one of those incredible testimonies still remains fictitious until they can be scientifically proven. I was not worried by any of that stuff, of course, because in my gut, like so many of your awesome listeners, I knew that Bigfoot was real. I think knowing without seeing makes you a pretty special and unique person, because invariably you're in touch with your gut. One thing I've learnt about our natural instincts is that they don't lie, and they keep us alive and guide us to make the right choices in tough, life-threatening situations, like choosing to run from a wild animal or walking away slowly, and sometimes even playing dead. All these gut instincts, if listened to, can quite literally save our lives. I grew up in Seattle with 2 brothers and 1 sister. Both my parents are High Court judges, and my brother and sisters are both embarking on the same legal journeys. They're all incredibly academic, with sharp brains and very high IQs. Imagine my parents' surprise when I came along. You would have been forgiven for believing my mother had brought the wrong baby home from the hospital after I was born. I had very little academic prowess, and my fascination and interest was in the natural world. I'm much more interested in fishing, hiking, hunting, and exploring than anything to do with academic studies. I came from a family where getting distinctions was as natural as breathing, whereas for me I was lucky if I passed a math assignment. Growing up, I absolutely hated and loathed school so very much. I remember I had my own techniques for handing in my belated homework. Yes, I did use that proverbial excuse that the dog ate my homework a few times, but when that excuse wore thin and the teacher asked me where my homework was from the previous day, I would say, "Miss, I handed it in, I know I did." Then I would proceed to look under my teacher's desk, and cunningly I would say, "Oh, here it is. You must have dropped it when you were gathering all the homework together," with a look of great surprise written on my face. Of course, I had just put the book there. I do remember this deceptive technique of mine worked every time without failing, giving me a full extra day to get an assignment done and finished. Although on a few occasions my teacher did explain that it was odd that it was always my homework that managed to drop and go missing, and not anybody else's in the whole class. What could she do, though? She couldn't prove a thing. As you can imagine, my parents found that my flagging grades was a huge embarrassment to them, and they could not relate to my struggle with academia. I think it had to be humbling for them to have a son that did not conform to their high academic standards, and maybe that's why I came into their lives in a funny way. Do not get me wrong, my parents loved me, but my passions and interests were so peculiar and odd to them. Imagine their immense horror when they began to realize that I had a deep and extraordinary fascination for the cryptid creature called Bigfoot. They were utterly horrified. I do remember hearing my mother discussing my fascination with Bigfoot and saying to my father, "He's not that bright, not like our other children. He believes everything he sees on television, as he seems intent on gullibly trusting that this spurious creature of fiction is actually real." I could hear my father say, "I don't want any son of mine filling his mind with such atrocious hogwash, especially when it's clearly not true. What nonsense they feed them these days on television." It's not hogwash to him, dear. Try and understand that. I know it's hard for us to relate to it, But you do need to understand that and accept it. Just let him be. He's not exploring the same legal paths as the rest of us, and we need to accept that he's different, and as erroneous as that may be to stomach, we just have to accept it. And so it was. My family did begin to accept my very strange, quirky peculiarities, which were not something they really enigmatically understood. As a young boy, I busied myself in all kinds of enterprising odd jobs, mowing lawns for people, planting seedlings, enamelling yard fences, and even painting houses, all to procure some well-needed pocket money for one intention only. I wanted nothing more in this entire world than embarking upon some exciting adventures to various places around North America, Alaska, and Canada, where Bigfoot sightings had indeed been recorded. I then designated to meet 2 other very interested boys my age, who were equally as desirous as I was to encounter a Bigfoot, but I was to unfortunately later to ascertain that they had much more nefarious motives about Bigfoot, but more about that a little later in my story. So armed with all my camping equipment, my own reliable car, a 2008 Honda Civic, a Ruger rifle, and everything I could possibly need, I literally travelled to all parts of America with these 2 other young men in order to find Bigfoot and to search for signs of this elusive, wonderful creature. I also met hundreds of people on my journey who had had curious, somewhat bizarre encounters with Bigfoots. Some were happy stories, others utterly terrifying. I did notice that many of these encounters happened when a person was all on their own, or it was an accidental chance encounter, but more often than not, and 9 times out of 10, these encounters always happened when they were never expected or anticipated. It never happened when they were looking for the creature. I promise you that I travelled all across America to the so-called ostensible Bigfoot hotspots, and I did battle the elements hugely, such as rain, snow, sleet, ice, and extremes of heat and cold. We literally roughed it and camped out in almost every weather condition, with one solo intention alone, and that was to find the mythical creature that we loved to call Bigfoot. We saw signs of him everywhere we went. Believe me, we encountered large footprints that we carefully measured and excitedly photographed in mud and sometimes even in snow. And believe me, these tracks were absolutely colossal. Our largest footprint measured 26 inches. Now that is jumbo-sized indeed. We came across trees that had been deliberately snapped, as well as hut-like structures resembling Indian tepees, layered on the ground made from large tree limbs that had been placed strategically on top of each other. We found Bigfoot nests that rarely stank of rotting flesh and stale urine. Sometimes we would even find food supplies on the ground, like walnuts and fresh fruit such as berries and paws, apples and wild pears. And we also came across piles and piles of clean bones, where every morsel had been cleaned to perfection. We would hang around, hoping to encounter the elusive creature, but they never returned to their nests while we were looking for them, even though we wore ghillie suits and lay low, making ourselves as inconspicuous as conceivably possible. What was extraordinary for me personally was that the more we searched for Bigfoot and found startling, compelling evidence, the less chance we seemed to actually encounter the creature, almost as if they knew our intentions and were deliberately lying low, staying only yards away from us probably, and laughing at us in the process. I wouldn't be at all surprised. We did have these moments when the woods became very quiet and subdued, and all the natural noises of the woods, like the pretty bird songs, would just dissipate, almost as if someone had turned off all the background music with the flick of a switch. Also, there were times when the woodland animals behaved in strange, bizarre ways, looking anxiously towards the woods, and hightailing it out of there as quick, hasty gallop, almost as if they sensed a vicious predator of some kind was in their midst. So we did indeed witness all these strange idiosyncrasies, as well as sense and experience eyes on us a lot of the time, but once again we kept drawing blanks in our search for this evasive, elusive and mythical creature. One evening, as I was sitting by the fire pit on a cool summer evening in the Ozarks, I think it was, because believe me, we've been almost everywhere, so it's a challenge for me to literally pinpoint every location for you that we have actually visited.
As we were eating a freeze-dried meal of macaroni, cheese and sausages, my friend Mark started registering his complete exasperation about our seemingly fruitless and futile search for Bigfoot. "I am so frustrated," he said. "I wanted to kill the thing so we could prove to the world once and for all that Bigfoot exists." It was when the other friend of mine also agreed that killing a Bigfoot was what needed to be done that I realized in horror that these guys were not my friends. I had no desire to kill the creature. Not at all. I just wanted to encounter the beast. I discerned with horrified revulsion and sickening disgust that their motives on coming on these Bigfoot expeditions with me was nefarious, to say the least. I realized suddenly that I had drawn the short straw, and so I disassociated myself in engaging in Bigfoot research with any of these guys ever again, and I never saw them, not once. When I returned to Seattle, I worked my way up to becoming a restaurant manager at a well-known, long-established restaurant chain. But I spent all my spare time camping, fishing and hiking, but thoughts of pursuing Bigfoot were far from my mind, because in truth I'd given up on actually finding him, and my dream was definitely over. The thought about ever encountering the creature did seem crazy now, and besides I was so engaged in a very busy, hectic lifestyle. It was while I was working at a restaurant manager that I actually met Liesel, who was introduced to me by one of my waitresses. Liesel and I connected almost immediately and began dating. It was when our relationship became much more serious that Liesel decided that she wanted to introduce me to her wonderful, warm and engaging family, who just so happened to live in West Virginia. While I was staying with Liesel, Mark, one of her brothers, had booked a surprise romantic retreat to a remote, very idyllic area for the weekend with his fiancée, Hazel. It transpired that poor Hazel had come down with a very bad bout of flu, and so Mark very generously gifted us with a holiday retreat package, because neither of them were going to be able to go on this exciting escapade, and it would be a pity to waste it. I'm not going to tell you where this beautiful retreat was for obvious reasons, but what I will say is that it was quite literally in the middle of nowhere, and was a place well off the beaten track, with no sign of human habitation for many miles. Even with my GPS navigator, I kept getting lost as we kept losing connection on our drive. Finally, we found the place set against an old logging road. It was the most enchanting, exquisite cabin that I have ever seen, and whomever designed this intriguing, congenial place had literally transformed it into the most sumptuous, cosy, luxurious den, with comfortable couches, king-size beds, with fabulously soft feather duvets and pillows, not to mention large romantic stone fireplaces in every single room, and a very modern state-of-the-art kitchen. There was also a wraparound wooden deck which overlooked the most gorgeous views onto the towering mountainous valleys, rugged rocky outcrops, and beautiful resplendent emerald green forest that literally stretched back for hundreds of miles, that was full of sycamore, birch, green ash, honey locust, and eastern white pine trees, and truly it was just so stunningly beautiful, and I was so thrilled to have the opportunity to stay at such a serene, tranquil dwelling in such an enchanting place like this. Being so remote, naturally everything was off-grid, but very well managed with solar systems that are used by fish and wildlife and provide you with electricity and hot water, so all the luxury amenities were available to us. That evening, Liesel and I prepared a fire pit with my favourite fire starter, which is a little secret I learnt from a tracker friend of mine, which is using cotton wool laced in petroleum jelly and putting them all in a plastic bag, and it works like a dream to get the fire going in every situation, especially when weather conditions are challenging. So if you haven't tried it, please give it a go. You'll be glad you did. Liesel and I sat back on our comfortable chairs by this fire pit, cooking barbecue ribs and watching the glorious golden sun setting over the valley in an artist's palette of magnificent pinks, yellows, tangerines and golds. Finally the sunset faded, and a dusky darkness cloaked the whole valley, and then the jewels of the vast firmament made their presence known, and soon we were gazing up at the soft light of the pearly moon and the twinkling diamond-like jewels of the sparkling stars. We could hear the chorus of the crickets and the sounds of the frogs, and it was absolutely gorgeous. I could live here forever, sighed Liesel happily. This is the dream life. "It is magnificent," I agreed. Suddenly in the valley we heard whooping sounds, but I did not even register or think about Bigfoot, not for a second. It was very odd. "How peculiar," said Liesl to me. "I wonder what those strange sounds were. They sound different to other animal sounds you usually hear." I did not give her comment any thought, I kid you not. The next morning Liesl and I did a little hiking through the wooded area, and right in the middle of the woods we came to a little clearing where there was a gorgeous little stream running through the woods, surrounded by a large, smooth, rocky outcrop, and the water ran through the area with a very swift current, so that the crashing sound of the water hitting the rocks furiously was unusually calming. Suddenly Liesl was getting very excited and asked me to shush, and she was beckoning me to follow her very silently. I followed her cautiously, knowing that she had seen something. "Be very quiet," she said, pointing to some rocks. "Look over there. Can you see it? It's a mother bear with 2 of her cubs. We must be very careful. They can be very protective over their young and get very dangerous and aggressive." Feeling a flurry of excitement because I absolutely love bears, and although we were carrying a rifle, bear spray and an air horn, I definitely did not want to be using any of these things today. We found a rocky outcrop that overlooked the back of the bear. I could tell it was a great deal bigger than the average black bear and was hazel in colour and not black. I studied the creature closely, and there were 2 bodies next to her, suckling her breasts, one on either side. But this was no bear. I looked again, and in my binoculars I could see the long hands and flat nail ridge, and I began to feel my heart beating violently in my chest, not in fear, but in utter awe and disbelief. How could this be possible? I was observing a mother Bigfoot with her twins. It didn't get better than this. "It's Bigfoot," I whispered to Liesl excitedly. "It's a mother Bigfoot with twins." Liesl and I kept fighting for the binoculars because we were so excited to observe these creatures, and the view we had on the mother was absolutely stupendous and amazing. Only I did wish with all my heart that she would just turn around, just so that I could see her face. Then suddenly, as if on cue, she did, and she appeared to be looking at a large pile of twigs that was lying on her side. And then I saw her in all her glory, and as I write this I am shaking with excitement as I relive that extraordinary memory of when I first laid my eyes on Bigfoot. The Bigfoot was colossal in size. She towered at about 8 feet tall, was about 700 pounds, and 4.5 feet wide. From her head to her toes she was covered in a luxurious coat of long flowing hazel hair that in certain shafts of sunlight possessed a very glorious golden hue. This creature was utterly magnificent. She was majestic, lofty, powerful, and exceedingly agile. Her bullet-shaped head blended seamlessly onto her huge shoulders. I noticed her arms were very long, and her legs were slender and toned, but her whole body was taut with very powerful muscle definition, and there were no signs on her torso that she'd recently given birth, because her stomach muscles were clenched and very ripped. I could see that clearly, because the hair on her stomach area was much less dense. Her face was beautiful, with a joyful countenance, which I imagine was due to being a very proud mother. I noticed that her brown eyes were a rich cocoa colour, and they were expressive and humourful. The skin was a leathery texture and was a deep chocolate colour, and she had a very prominent brow ridge, flat nose, and very slender mouth. Her 2 little younglings were the cutest balls of fluff that you have ever seen in your entire life. They were utterly gorgeous and adorable, and believe me, they were as fluffy as well as exceedingly mischievous. I'm not sure how old they were, because they were very small in size, like 2-year-old toddlers, but they were both still suckling, and unlike human toddlers that fall over all the time, these small humanoids were exceedingly agile, walking almost perfectly on 2 feet, without encountering any problems at all, and appeared to have no fear of the gushing current of the stream. The mother kept grabbing twigs for her little toddlers, throwing them towards her younglings, like you might throw a stick for a dog. Her little sprogs would catch them and bring them to their mother, who would show them how to snap them. The little Bigfoots watched their mother snapping the twigs with wide, curious brown eyes that seemed almost too big for their angular faces. When she snapped the twig, they would try and copy her, and when they succeeded, they would make a happy whooping sound. Whoop! Whoop! It was like she was teaching them how to snap twigs, but I realized she was showing them different types of twigs from varying species of different trees. Her sprogs examined everything very closely. The twigs were unique. Some were harder to break than others, and the sprogs found this very interesting. She appeared to be chattering away to her younglings and teaching them about the twigs and the nature of the bark. It was incredible to watch, and I realized how privileged Liesl and I were to witness such an amazing scene. After their lessons, the younglings perched on their mother's torso and proceeded to drink a little more milk from her furry breasts, pressing them hungrily with their eager hands to extract as much milk as possible. Her beautiful younglings played together, probing the twigs themselves and choosing which ones to actually break. If they struggled to break a twig, they brought it back to their mother, who would show them how it was properly done, until they more or less got the hang of it. I do not know how long we watched the mother and her cubs, but it was for a very long time. Finally, she waded into the shallow water to refresh herself, with her cubs tottering beside her. We watched her splashing her dark leathery face with the water, and her two little cubs instinctively imitated their mother and began splashing their tiny, cute little faces, clearly delighting in the experience. Finally, Mother Bigfoot lifted up her two offspring and put each one on either side of her massive shoulders, where they sat very comfortably, and she literally glided away on her long legs with a seamless fluidity and grace, unlike anything that I've ever seen before. It took me a long while to recover from what I'd actually seen. I could not believe the irony of all ironies. For so many years I'd spent copious amounts of money, tackled some of the most challenging terrain, overcome huge obstacles, and experienced all manner of arduous weather conditions, from snow, sleet to frozen rain, as well as all in hot pursuit of Bigfoot. And now, on an unlikely off-the-cuff chance weekend away that was never intentionally orchestrated in the first place, I had encountered a Mother Bigfoot with her twins, and this encounter was one that far surpassed my greatest expectations, because let's face it, this one was one heck of an encounter. Looking back, I realized one thing about these incredible creatures, and that is that they are experts at remaining hidden, and I think they'll only show themselves to you on their own terms, because I think they know when you're looking for them. Perhaps they have some mind-reading capabilities and can even read our intentions. Liesl and I got married about a year ago, but once a year I book that retreat in the hope of encountering that awesome Mother Bigfoot again. So now you know why I don't want to tell you where that retreat is. So there you are. I hope you enjoyed my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.